Before,
Okay. Hi, everybody. Today is September 25th, and before we begin our board business meeting, we have a hearing on our code of conduct. We don't have anybody in the audience who is here to make a comment, so we are going to move into our business meeting. If we have people arrive shortly who want to give a comment, we can then make a modification and address and receive those comments. So with that, let's start our board meeting. And we will begin, I think, with our announcements.
Yeah, sure. So good evening, everyone. Thanks so much. I don't need this, right? You're all here. Thanks so much for being here tonight. So just to take you through a couple of the announcements that I want to spotlight so you are aware of them. We do have our first Theater Arts Committee meeting tomorrow afternoon, so that's pretty exciting. I'm looking forward to that. We also have our National Art Honor Society happening this week at 7 p.m. on Thursday, and that's happening at the high school. We have our first late start this Friday, and there's about one a month or so. Actually, there's 1 month I don't think we have one, and then another month we have two, but it's about one a month. We have our board retreat next Wednesday night, which also coincides with a presentation from Michael Nerney.
Oh, really?
Oh, that's
bummer.
too bad.
He's
wonderful.
He's really, really good. And very, very helpful.
Oh, this is.
But he'll be taped, right?
And the adolescent brain.
He's going to be taped.
There you go.
Yes. So I'm happy to do a viewing party at our next meeting. I'm happy to host. I'll bring popcorn. But I do understand that Michael is pretty awesome and pretty engaging. But the good thing is we are using Michael's presentation, which will be viewable, to inform an upcoming panel that the district is going to be hosting around emotional resiliency. And so our district team has been working on that. They've been meeting, they've met a couple times with an outside group around emotional resiliency whose names I cannot remember right now. But Gail Kipper, Lou DiPietro, and Amy Kazis have all been involved in that. So it's going to be a K-12 night on emotional resiliency in a panel type of format. And that is November 29th, so that you have that in the back of your minds. It is like a Wednesday night, I believe. So again, Michael's presentation will be recorded, so it'll be available afterwards. And I apologize for the conflict with our retreat, but that'll be fun too. And also, as an aside, the Hastings Booster Club is hosting an afternoon at the Doubledays to watch the Tampa Bay Buccaneers play the Giants, and Ali Marpet, who is on the Bucks, who did not win yesterday, but neither did the Giants, so it should be a pretty even game. They are playing, and so the Booster Club is doing a fundraiser at 4 o'clock on Sunday. So you can RSVP, though. They were looking for an RSVP yesterday, but I'm sure they'll be okay if you RSVP afterwards. So that's just some of the upcoming stuff. And then our next board meeting is on October 10th, which also happens to be the same day as the Race Matters Multicultural Book Fair. I think they do one in the fall and then one in the spring.
Well, the first one they did was in the spring, the Multicultural
They did
Book
one in
Fair.
June, right?
And I will say it was outstanding, and it was so exciting to see kids just walking out with armloads of books and just so excited. So I really encourage everybody to attend.
Yeah, so I think this is the fall version of that.
That sounds right.
From what I understand.
Where is it? Where's it held?
In the spring, it was in the library.
Yes.
At the library that the high school and the middle school share. I
don't know.
I don't know if
we
that
can find out.
Location there.
To be quite honest with you, today was the first day that I even realized that this was on the calendar. But we can certainly get the details around that. It is October 10th, the same day we have a board meeting. Yes.
Someone on the Arts Committee was asking me whether you were going to the meeting, and I didn't know if you...
I will be there, yes.
You will, okay. And then
I'm not facilitating, I'm just
Gerard.
Yes, Gerard.
Yeah. And then the board retreat that we're having.
Yeah.
What time does that start?
5 p.m. is what we agreed to.
And this is on
Next Wednesday, the 4th. And I believe Robert is going to be, I'm speaking with Robert tomorrow to kind of go over what should be on the agenda, and then I will get that out to you based on where we left off last time and some of the conversations we've had since then. I do believe the plan is to go 5 to 9-ish. Then there'll be food and we'll be out at a certain time. And then from there we would decide if we would want a third retreat, which is typically how Robert structures them. It's a 3-part series, but then the next one being later in the year, and that's something we would decide upon after this session. So that is just an update on upcoming announcements, and thank you to Janine for putting that all out in our Hastings Happenings, which went out and I finally found it had gone into my spam. So now I'm getting it. I'm super excited. Yes, it gets quarantined, exactly. We have this quarantine situation, so I was able to unquarantine it, so now I get it. So quickly, also to just spotlight a few other things as part of my superintendent report, and thank you to Janine for preparing a few pictures for us to kind of take a look at. So the first thing that we want to spotlight is our physics bus was in town last week. It visited Hillside and the middle school, and I happened to be in a meeting in the nurse's office at the middle school during the physics bus's visit, which was like right outside in the courtyard. At one point, there were like explosions, things flying around, and bubbles, and the kids loved every minute of it. So it's really a hands-on kind of physics-based scientific experience, differentiated at Hillside than it was here. So the kids really had a great time, and I could see them cycling through the different activities that were outside that morning. So we were really happy about that, and Hastings PTSA sponsored that.
Do you know what particular this experiment is?
So that is a
They're getting
sound.
oxygen.
It's who can pass out first. There was some sort of sound situation going on there. I'm not 100% clear. I don't think they're sniffing something. I think they're talking into something and trying to see how the sound travels. There was a lot of noise. That I could tell you. There was a lot of things happening around sound. So yeah, so that is the deal with the physics bus.
And I will add that it's a whole very sweet project. I think some of our local families put up in their homes some of the people who are working at the physics bus. So
Yes,
it's a really
yes.
grassroots kind of thing. And I
Yeah,
just
it is
terrific
very much a
excitement.
yeah. That's a great. That's
So
exactly
thank you
right.
to the families. Also, shout out, thank you to Cynthia Brent for bringing this idea to the PTSA.
That's great. Thank you for that. We also have a few students, as you can see up here, who were selected for the NISMA Conference All-State, which is pretty cool. It's tough to make the NISMA Conference All-State, so to have not just one, but 3 kids and then an alternate make it is pretty great. So we have Ruby, who is jazz soprano voice and vocal jazz. She does the often at our football games. She will sing the national anthem. She's great. They're all great. Samara Sharp is alto 1. She does mixed chorus. I've had a chance to meet her as well. And Anya, whose last name I don't want to mess up, but Van Hook Stratton, also alto 1 in the mixed chorus. And then we have an alternate in Simon Brea, who is a tenor. So they were selected for this, which is pretty significant.
So this was specifically for the vocal part of this. Have they not made the selections for the band and orchestra yet, or?
You know what? I don't know if it.
I believe they had, and we just don't have any.
You just don't have any.
yeah.
Okay.
So there you go. Thank you, Parker.
Yeah.
Come on over. I do know that it's from what I understand from colleagues, it's a pretty big deal to have like this many
Yeah.
kids picked. So it's pretty cool.
That's
great. So congratulations to Ruby and Samara, Anya, and Simon. We also have a National Merit Scholarship finalist in Cashin, and he qualified for this Merit Scholarship program, and he has the opportunity to compete for about 7,500 scholarships that could be up to $32 million. I don't think he's going to win $32 million, but he can get some of that pot. Because if he does, we'll be asking him to help. No.
Study for those PSATs.
But I think the significant piece, and it's up there for your eyes to see there, is less than 1% of the students taking the preliminary SAT actually get named to be a semifinalist. So it's pretty significant again. So it's nice to see Cashin represented. And this is on our website as well, right, Jimmy? So that's out there. Also, just an FYI for you, I in different conversations with different groups, family groups internally, I started a blog, which is really just a repository for my communications out to the community. So all 9 that have gone out so far are already on this. So if you go to our district website, you'll see the blog that is just called HOH Superintendent, and so it could be reflective of the office and not necessarily personally reflective of me, but it is going to just be the place that I put personal email communication out to the community so that people can access it.
I'm sorry, Tony, under which tab? Or is
So
it not
it's on
under?
the homepage? Oh,
Homepage above announcements. Homepage of the website.
Right.
Above announcements on the left.
District.
I actually might be able to pull it up for you.
Or docs.
Hold on a second.
I see.
You found it?
Superintendent's block. Yes, thank
I'm
you.
going to pull it up.
Thanks,
Look at
Jimmy.
this. We have like this situation.
And if there was ever another
Here.
one started, we could just say blogs, and then, you know,
It's right
somebody
here.
else would start another blog, and we
And
just sit there.
It's nothing
Everyone.
like fancy or anything. I didn't go crazy with it, but it's all listed here, and you can scroll down and you find all the old posts as well, and then they're organized by month or year as you go on. And so I use Blogger, just so you all know what I use, and Blogger is owned by Google, so I use my synonymous T at learn.hohschools.org account to set this up. So it is a district account. I mean, my name on it, but so that's what this is. So the certainly easy enough to set up as well. So I know you were mentioning something about communication. So it's an easy platform to use. And if I'm not mistaken, you all have a Google account just because you have an HOH email account, and so it would be, you know, like litvinel at learn.hohschools.org. So that's how.
Same password.
Same password for your regular email, yeah. So just as an aside, if that's something that is of interest, but we started doing some work around Google Docs, so that would be something we could work off of, so we're all using the same, platform, if you will, and not using personal Gmail accounts so it doesn't get lost in cyberspace, which can happen. So that's up there. And I had commented about that being there in any communication to the families a few weeks ago that the blog will be available, so it's there. That's it. That is my update for you. Anyone have any questions?
Okay, if there's no questions, we'll move on to our auditor's report.
You can pull up that.
I am going to pull that up right now. I'm all over
I think I'm going to move that. I like rolling my chair. It's fun.
Good. So, if this okay, Susan, I'm going to just spotlight it up here like this.
Oh, sure. That's good.
Tell me when you're ready to.
Okay, and then I'll just... Okay, my name is Susan Barossi. I'm a partner with PCAF O'Connor Davies, and I'm the partner in charge of the Hastings-on-Hudson Union Free School District audit. We were here conducting the audit in the first week of August, I believe, right? Right after. So, and that is really close to the year end, because remember the fiscal year end for the school district is June 30th. So that is a great turnaround time to get for the district to have their books closed so that we can perform that audit first week of August. Just so a little bit of background. So on the audit team, there are two partners, co-partners. My co-partner is John Cosgrove, and the audit manager is Leslie Tillotson. And we were here with also senior and 3 junior accountants to perform the audit. So just tell you a little bit about the school district before I start going into the slides. So the school district is comprised of many funds. The fiscal funds for the school district, there's the general fund, which is the operational fund. There's the capital projects fund, which the capital projects are run through. There is the special purpose fund, where gifts or special purpose monies, grants are put in, and scholarships are put into the special purpose fund. There's the extra classroom activity fund, and that's where all the extra classroom activities, the clubs, run through. There's the debt service fund, where all of the expenses for the debt are run through. So although the district is comprised of many funds, tonight we are going to focus on the general fund, because the general fund is the main operational fund of the district. When we were here, so let's go to the next. So let me just tell you a little bit about what the audit comprises. So the audit comprises, we have to perform the audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and standards applicable to financial audits contained in government auditing standards as well. That's because this is a Union Free School District, right? Mm-hmm. It's a governmental entity. And we have to ensure that the audit, we do this to ensure that the audit was designed to achieve reasonable rather than absolute assurance that the financial statements are free from any material misstatements. So where do we get those financial statements? Well, during the year, all of the transactions of the school district are recorded and maintained by the financial department, the finance department of the school district itself, and they're overseen by the superintendent and the district treasurer, and all the transactions overseen by the board, okay, and its audit committee. But what happens at the end? A trial balance is generated, given to us electronically, input into our system, right, to compile the numbers for the financial statement. For the financial statement, they will receive the draft financial statement. That does not mean, because we did that compilation, that any of our independence as auditors has been impaired. What happens is we're simply pulling those numbers together. However, management has their own internal reports and is aware of those numbers and and the effect of those numbers and what the outcome of those numbers are. Management, along with the governance of the board, they prepare the internal reports. During the year, there are there's approvals of budgets, right? And then there are board resolutions to approve any additions or deductions from the original budgeted amounts. So therefore, these are management's financial statements that we are auditing, okay? So what do we do throughout the process? What we do is we look at the internal controls. We test those internal controls to see which controls we can rely on, okay? What does that encompass? That encompasses that we also read the internal auditor's reports, because in accordance with the 5-point plan, what has to happen? First of all, the district has to have an external auditor, which is our firm, to do the external audit of the financial statements. They have to have an internal auditor. That internal auditor, what does that do? It's more of a operational review of transactions for an internal audit. But what they have to do is initial risk assessment, and then produce a focus area. That focus area, as an outcome of the internal auditor's risk assessment, the internal auditor can make suggestions as what he or she believes the focus area should be. But in the end, it's the board in the end that determines the focus area. That focus area was capital projects, and basically focused on the field itself this year. But as part of this performing the audit, we as auditors test the internal controls, not to give an opinion on those internal controls, but we also review the internal auditor's reports and have a dialogue with the internal auditor. The internal auditor is a CUME, and we had a dialogue with the CUME. We also have, as part of the 5-point plan, we had an entrance meeting with the audit committee. To discuss, this was conducted in April. Remember, the fiscal year end is June 30th, but we had that entrance meeting to discuss what we as auditors was our plan to accomplish this audit, but we also got feedback from the audit committee themselves of what areas they felt strongly needed to be looked into. And also, yes, we did get an understanding of what happened in the district by reviewing the minutes throughout the year, keeping up with the website. Now I'll keep up with the blog, okay, but also reviewing the internal reports, but we also wanted to speak with the audit committee and the board to plan out that audit. Then what happens, the audit occurs, we have that audit, we were here on site with the entire team for a full entire week, but then much more then happens when we get back to the office as well. Then what happens there, we pull together the reports, and then we have an exit meeting with the audit committee. That exit meeting took place last week, and as part of that exit meeting, we reviewed the financial statements, we reviewed the management letter. What is the management letter? That's the second bullet up on the screen. So in a management letter, we communicate in writing any deficiencies in internal control that we consider to be either significant and material weaknesses. Our audit only communicated control deficiencies, okay? And those are basically housekeeping matters, which I'll go into later. What is the result of our audit? Well, as a result of the audit, we'll go back to that second slide. So as a result of audit, we have to advised the management of the appropriateness of their accounting policies and their application, and they appeared appropriate for the district. We also communicate any fraud or illegal acts noted during the course of the audit. However, our audit cannot be relied on to identify all instances of fraud or illegal acts. However, there were no instances of suspicion or allegations of fraud noted during this audit process. What would happen if that occurred? If that occurred and we uncovered that and we felt that it was at the employee level, we would go directly to management to discuss this, to report this. If we felt it was at the management level, we would have to go directly to the superintendent, right, to discuss this. If we felt if it was at the superintendent level and below, we have to go directly to the board. Okay, so
Just a quick
sure.
question. I'm just curious. It's not in this district, but what are the top 2 or 3 things that you would see that would indicate in an external auditor's report that would indicate the potential for fraud?
Really, the potential for fraud is improper the most would be improper segregation of duties, because the more individuals you have involved in any transaction, the better. Why? Because there are more checks and balances of that transaction. However, we realize, in a district, you have a budget, you have a tight budget, and you can only employ so many individuals to be involved in a transaction. Therefore, what can be implemented? Compensating controls, checks and balances, right? Compensating controls on those. So that is, why. So someone would say, well, I trust that employee. I would never, even though there's one employee involved in this transaction and only one employee only, someone could say, I trust that person. But you don't want to have that temptation there. You don't want to increase the risk for that temptation to be there, and that's why. So that really is the top. So that is the main one of the main risk. A second risk would be in the IT controls. Okay, to make sure that the IT controls are looked at, access controls are there. Who has access to what and why, and that it's being overseen. So it would be access controls for IT. And there's also cyber risk, right? There's cyber risk out there, right? So but that we had detailed in the management letter. If we saw any of that, we have to go directly to management. Like as I said, we would go to management, or we would go to superintendent, or we go to the board. So that's why it's important that we also have that dialogue with the internal auditor, because the internal auditor, does their risk assessment as well. So,
Thank you.
okay. If we go to the next slide. Okay. At the end of the audit process, what did occur? Well, there's really, now the opinion is, I think, moved on to 2 pages, right? But there's an independent auditor's report which is included in the financial statements, and that's the only report that the firm owns. And there was at the end of the audit process, an unmodified opinion on the financial statements was issued. It used to be called unqualified opinion. Now it's been modernized to be called unmodified opinion. Okay, so it's an equivalent, right? I have gone through many of these items. Management's judgments and accounting estimates were appropriate. Order adjustments, there were no uncorrected order adjustments. There is in the 93-page document, which is called the financial statements, a management discussion and analysis, which was prepared by management, was reviewed by our team and discussed, and that really is a summation of those 93 pages, and I think it was well done. Okay. There were no difficulties encountered during the audit, no unresolved matters, no disagreements with the management. I have to say, with this district, I value the relationship with all of my clients, but with this district, what I feel that is something that really needs to be stated is that during the year there's an open dialogue. Okay, so open dialogue of what's going on with the internal auditor, what's going on at the board level, what changes are happening at the district, and if there are questions throughout the year, they're voiced as any issue occurs. And that too aids, I think that it works in both ways, because it helps the district be able to close their books in such a timely manner, okay? And we can come in and perform our audit. So that's very important for the district. Our independence was not impaired. Next. So, as I said, the district is made up of many funds, but the funds that we are going to go over today is the general fund, and the general fund is the operational fund. And I asked Maureen Carabello to chime in with me on as we're going to do this.
You want me just to go?
I'll go through the columns, and then we'll. So in the slide here, right? This is the financial statement highlights for the general fund revenues and expenditures, summer year end for the year ended June 30, 2017. If you look at that, there's an original budget. That was the budget that was approved by the voters. Okay. There's a final budget, which includes any budget modifications made to that budget, and then if there were modifications made, they would need to be approved by the board. And we do not test every single budget modification, but we do take a sample of those and make sure that the resolution was approved. Actual is the actual what happened. Encumbrances are those purchase orders issued and outstanding in which invoices have not been received, and then there's the variance. So, Maureen, do you want to go down?
So basically, this just highlights where we ended up at the end of the year. And in terms of revenues, which we went over in more detail at our audit committee meeting, we had a positive budget on our revenues of $500,000. And what I was explaining to the audit committee is that typically with your revenues, you're conservative in your budget estimates, because at the time you're creating the budget, you do get some sense from the state, but some of our revenues from the state are based upon expenditures from the previous year. So we typically are conservative with our state aid estimates. But just to highlight what gave us what was the main driver of the positive variance was a combination of about $150,000 of additional state aid, mostly due to BOCES expenditures. We also had some additional revenues for the filming that was done in town, and again, things that we can't anticipate are going to happen. That accounted for about $70,000 of additional revenue. We had additional tuition students from both out-of-district placements as well as parentally placed students in the school district, which accounted for about $200,000 additional revenue. This is something that typically is typical of what we see, that we're usually positive variance, because you definitely cannot be negative. So we tend to in this situation, we were fortunate to have some, especially the tuition, sales tax, and a bunch of smaller categories that gave us an additional positive revenue flow of $500,000. In terms of our expenditures, the variance there, which was savings over our original budget, was comprised of about $300,000 worth of transportation savings, just based upon merged contracts. And again, those are things that it's very difficult at the time of developing the budget to know exactly what our transportation budget will end up. We always budget to ensure that all of our students have appropriate and good transportation, and if there's issues that go on during the year, we can react to that. But we did, in fact, have about $300,000 additional funds there. We had some unanticipated retirements that had occurred after we developed our budget, and we ended up again, items such as substitute salaries, leave replacement salaries, which we just guesstimate based on the year before. We didn't end up needing as much funds there. And in just different budget categories, also ERS and TRS came in a little bit less than we had anticipated. So we did have, and then we also had legal expenses that were about $150,000 less than we had anticipated. So with all that said and done, we ended up with about a $2.4 million positive variance on expenditures, which again, all of these, we knew this during the course of the year. That's why we were able to offset $1.8 million to the 17-18 year budget to offset taxes. So this is not like an unknown variance, and had we not had these variances, we would have had to raise another $1.8 million worth of taxes this year to balance this year's budget. So that's kind of how it flows, because typically you're conservative on both your revenue and your expenditures, within reason. And a lot of these things, such as, and also in this area, we actually, I think, had about $400,000 worth of savings in special ed tuition as well. And that, again, is the special ed department budgets based upon not knowing if students are going to be placed out or in. So that's not unusual to see additional $500,000 or $600,000 of, and those are things that are given to me by department. So that's fairly typical. But as the time has gone on, we've, like in this year's budget, I did ask for people to be, like, although I appreciate that they're trying to be conservative, we just have to be mindful of not being too conservative either. But it was a good year overall.
So to sum up, if you look at that, the third line from the bottom there, the net change in fund balance, in the original budget, there was the planned use of $3.1 million of the fund balance in order to balance the budget, because, right, a budget has to be balanced, right? So you have your revenues, your expenditures, and then where would you get the variance? From the original to the final budget, that amount, the planned amount, stayed the same. Actually, what happened, $109,000 was added to the beginning fund balance to arrive at a $10 million fund balance. That $10 million is not free and clear, and we're going to go over that. Just so you know, another item to mention, yes, you had a positive variance in the revenues of $531,000, but you have to budget conservatively with those revenues, because if you don't hit those revenue targets, where else you have to be? Where else would you get that revenue once you have that budget passed? It's either you would have to get it in expenditure savings, or you would have to then balance through use of fund balance. So let's go, as I said, the end of the year, there was a $10 million fund balance, and let's just go through the breakout of that fund balance on the next slide. So, as I said, there are many funds. There's the general fund, that's the first column, the capital projects fund, which the capital projects run through, and then these non-major funds. That doesn't mean they're less important, but those are the funds that are grouped, and that's the school lunch, cafeteria, the special purpose fund, and debt service fund. As I said, we're going to focus on the general fund, because of the total fund balances, go to the bottom line, $11.5 million, $10 million of that is for the general fund. And the way I like to view the fund balance is made up of a series of buckets. Those buckets are filled, and they're filled for a purpose, and it's a designated purpose and legal purpose for those buckets. As part of the audit process, we as the auditors look at what goes in and out of those buckets, and if those buckets are useful, okay? What do you say, how would you mean if they're useful? Well, if you are reserves are for a specific purpose. If you set up a reserve and you cannot use that reserve for a certain purpose, then why would you fill up that bucket? Right? So we would have to question that. If you look at and then if you look at the general fund here, the $10 million, the first is restricted. So these are the series of restricted amounts. 4.5 million of the 10 million is restricted. Restricted for tax certiorari, $2.3 million. Those are refunds of taxes. So that's a bucket for a rainy day for the payment of tax certiorari. Employee benefit accrued liability for future employee benefits that are paid out, that's $209,000. Retirement system contributions, that's for the retirement system contributions to be paid out in the future, where the district can appropriate from here to pay out those contributions. Debt service, the payment of the debt. Repair, a special reserve was set up for future repairs. In fact, I remember when that was set up, because in order to take money out of that, you would need to get a vote.
Right, from repair and the capital, yeah, now,
Right.
yeah.
Then future capital
Yeah, they changed it.
projects.
Yeah, it's kind of, I would just done one if I knew that.
So
You know.
4.5 of the 10 is restricted, okay? Then go down to the next. These are what they would call the encumbrances. Those are purchase orders issued and outstanding in which invoices haven't been received. Basically, that occurs every year, and basically that's a given. It's whatever is left at the year end, open encumbrances. That's $300,000. The 3.2 million is what's been designated to balance the subsequent year's budget. So when you add the 4.5 plus the 3.2, that is basically approximately most of the 10 million. And an unassigned amount of 1.9 million, that's for, that does not have any designation. That's unassigned. In New York State, you legally can have an unassigned fund balance as long as it is not more greater than 4% of the subsequent year's budget. And I think it's around 3,
Yeah, something,
4.
well, 3.8 or something, 3.9, yeah.
So it's within the legal limits. The capital projects, the 782 is for the capital, restricted for the capital projects, and the 790, those are specific items that if you go delve into those 93 pages, 45,000 is for the school lunch program, 103,000 is for special purposes, and it can only be released when those special purposes are fulfilled. Okay, and we'll get into some of that later. And then there is 640,000, which is for debt service reserve for the future payment of debt service.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So the capital projects, is that basically the bond that was?
No.
No, okay.
That was money that a few years ago, we've spent most of it. Initially, we had set it up with a $2 million limit, and we had funded it to about $1.7 million, which we did use 1.5 of it toward our last capital project, and then we issued another $8 million in debt. You know, so we anticipated, we knew we were going to eventually have to do a bond, so we started to put money to the side in anticipation of doing the work. So this is what's left over, which doesn't have to be related to the bond work. This money could be used to do another, capital project that's not related to it.
Right,
So
like a flooring or roof.
right, exactly, yeah. So I mean,
Okay.
most likely there'll be a recommendation in the next year or so, because we've identified some facilities projects that most likely will make the recommendation to spend the repair and the capital. And I just want to, as a side note, tell you that the tax cert reserve as of today is $1.6 million, because subsequent to year end, again, with Susan, I just want to tell, we have about $8 million of outstanding tax certiorari's that are more likely, that's what we're going to pay, about $8 million out over the next, God knows how many years. So we're not even fully funded there, but we knew we were, that's why we're kind of putting money to the side, because that's money that for a fact you're going to have to pay back. So a lot of districts don't reserve for it, they just spend the money and then they issue bonds later, which take 15 years for people to pay back for money that the district knew they were going to have to pay back. So I think it's important that we have that fund, even though, and I'm glad that we had it, because like I said, we just paid out almost $700,000 between July 1st and today. And we also know that because of the reval, there were some commercial properties that were overvalued that we're going to have to pay back as well. So by the end of the year, this may be closer to we're probably going to spend out $1 million by the time we sit here next year out of that fund.
How long do you have to pay them back, for 1 year?
No, they can build up for up to 10 years, but you're only allowed to reserve for about 4, you're only legally allowed to reserve 5 years of a claim. So, right now, I know we still owe the A&P, which they filed, now, of course, it's closed, which will even be worse, because they had a year where they had no operation, and it's based on income, that's also part of how they're able to file against the school. So I know that's one that we will have to pay out, which I think they have 10 years built up, because typically we want to move them quickly to settle, but their side does not, because their attorneys want them to build up. That's what I've been, it's for whatever reason.
And on the fund level, you can't.
Thinking about commercial properties.
Right.
Yeah, 10 years.
So just as if you were thinking of, you can't accrue for these, right, set up a payable, because on the fund level, right, that's a near-term outflows and inflows. So what you accrue on the fund level are those you have judgments for. So that means the judge dated
Right.
that
It has
as
to
the
be
fiscal
signed.
year end. And therefore, you can accrue and set up that liability. So those that are judgments subsequent to the year and that are known would be on these full accrual statements, which are, but for the fund level, for the budget purposes, it would be those that you have judgments for.
So
Okay?
$8 million in judgments?
No, $8 million in claims.
Exposure.
Actually, more than $8
Exposure.
million, but $8 million likely to pay out, somewhere between that, because we have maybe $15 million worth of claims. And
right.
and a lot of these, when they did the reassessment, they didn't want to make the, places like we just paid out to Clairwood and to the two condos on on Broadway, and they continuously, because of the way things are structured, they can still continuously get refunds from us. So even doing that whole reassessment townwide really didn't help us because they didn't change the way those properties are taxed. So we've paid out to a lot, to both, all of those places multiple times over in the last few years. So, I mean, so that money's not going to be all free and clear. And the debt service, the retirement system we used, just to balance this year's budget, we had to use $750,000 out of that fund to balance this year's budget. So in order just to stay level for this upcoming budget, we need to do that again, which would give us 2 more years, and that fund will be depleted as well in the retirement system. And then, like I said, we're going to be recommending to use $350 out of the capital and repair, because we need to do work projects this year. So unless we're able to replenish that through savings of this year's budget or having revenues that exceed our revenue budget, we will be in a very different, it's very easy to shift $3 or $4 million in a fund balance in a year's time.
So these are the discussions, and then, we have to look at the substantiation to make sure that the reserves are legal, and also something that can be used in the future. It's very important. Okay, so we go to the next slide. So, as I said, on the fund level, that's what based on modified accrual, which is near-term inflows and outflows. On the entity-wide level, which is a full accrual statement, almost like a commercial statement, in accordance with GASB 54, the OPEB, which is the other post-employment benefit obligation, is lurking out there. And what is that? So other post-employment benefits are the health care, basically health care.
It's just health insurance.
For retirees,
that's what it is.
Right?
Uh-huh.
But here at the district, you have, as an actuary determines what this liability is. The actuary, that's not, we are the auditors, not the actuary. We obtain the actuarially determined liability report. It's based on active, which are about 256 employees, retired 136. Those are the ones who are being paid those benefits now. During the year, what was paid to those retirees was $1.3 million. And if you look at this chart, just to go, the total exposure is $38.4 million. And these are the calculations of the actuary itself. And what was paid out during the year to those
on their behalf, not to them, but paid out on their behalf. Yeah.
On behalf of them.
Health insurance.
Correct, yeah, just health, yeah. And most of them are on Medicare, as their primary by that point.
Right.
That's why it drops.
Right. And legally, this liability cannot be funded. Okay? Can you basically compare this liability from district to district? To realize there are many factors in calculating that liability, inclusive of what's in the contract to be paid in the future for a retired employee, and also it's based on active employees, because as an employee works, they're earning a piece of this of the liability, and therefore each district's employee population differs.
Right, well, it depends. It's like in any actuary report. It's based upon the age of your employees and when they're likely to retire, and they use that. So if you have a younger, you'd have a longer time to pay those benefits, and then as people are coming closer to different points like that would change that number. But we also, our district, what we require, for the most part, most of our employees pay 15% of their health insurance premiums in retirement, and there are districts that number is 0, and there's some districts that it's higher. So that's why it does differ district to district. And so our OPEB obligation at this year end would be $18 million if we were to make us like a regular business entity, right? If you could follow, that's what we would have to have on hand to pay for those.
So, but that's just to show you what is out there when you're negotiating those healthcare premiums, and also when you're negotiating the contracts, and just thinking about the retirees of the future. Okay? So if we go to the next slide, this, as I said, that there were, we looked at the internal controls, reviewed the internal controls, not to give any opinion on the internal controls, but to see which controls we can rely on, and also to discuss and give some recommendations. There were no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies noted, but control deficiencies were basically housekeeping in nature. I'm just going to highlight some of these, and because they are detailed in the management letter, which was discussed at the audit committee itself. In the packets that you received, there is that management letter, and also their management also prepared a written response, which is good because it's a plan, right? As I said, they were basically housekeeping in nature. We as an audit firm have to put these in, even the housekeeping comments in, because what might, if it was a commercial entity, it would be different. But the state controller, when they're reviewing all the information, which has to be submitted by a portal to the state this year, something new, they look at what any housekeeping even findings were and how the district is going to address them. So very minor, the fund balance reserves, there was a retirement system contribution adjustment. I think it increased the retirement system contribution.
Yeah, for like 30,000, yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And it just happened subsequent to the year end, the approval of the board was done, and that was only because of the timing of when the board meeting was and when the fiscal year ended. Okay, but what is required is really to get all your resolutions in as of the year end. Why is that? Because you don't want it to be an open book, right? So you want to look, but the district here, yes, they do monitor where their revenues and expenditures are. Why the state controller really recommends that the resolutions be done at the year end is because there are districts, and not this one, where they might not be thinking about adding or deducting from reserves until too late into the year end. They want this discussion to be ongoing. So that's why we had to put that there. But the resolution was approved by the board. Special purpose funds, there were some inactive trusts. We had some discussion about these inactive trusts. Basically, small amounts. The Burke Trust was $5,000. A Steinway piano restoration amount, about
$700. These are the things that
These
have
are
to
the
be written
small
on.
items that we have to discuss.
$43 million, $757
Right,
we
exactly,
didn't
that we have to
spend.
put in there. So that's why I want to point out when I say that the control deficiencies are housekeeping in nature, you can see those small amounts, okay? Extra classroom activity funds, this is ongoing.
Elementary.
Right, with the elementary school level. What's the purpose of an extra classroom activity fund? The true purpose is to teach a student how to run a business, okay? How you put money into the fund, how budget to spend money out of the fund, and what do you do with the ending fund balance of that fund. And the regulations say that this really, how can an elementary school level student be responsible for all of those steps without intervention maybe from a more senior person, okay? But I do run into a lot of elementary school level students who probably could accomplish this task, but it has to be noted in here. Inactive clubs, okay? That's another item, inactive clubs. If a club is set up, there's got to be activity in the club. So there were certain clubs, small amounts, chess club for $300. I know Maureen's like frowning over there. $300, right? Debate club, $138. Film club, okay, and math club. Okay, the math club was inactive too. That meant there was no activity, financial activity. The math club could be meeting, but if they're not spending, not collecting money, then they're called inactive. So math club, get moving, right? Or what has to happen is if the club is inactive, then the club has to be closed, and the monies go
Student union.
Union to be set up another future club. Okay.
So, I'm sorry, a club could be considered inactive because of financial inactivity,
Only
even though
financial
it's still
activity.
going on.
Even though it's still going on. So the math club, if they're meeting and they're talking about math, but the purpose of the club, in accordance with the regulations, is that they're collecting receipts and they're spending money because it's supposed to teach a student how to run a business. So if you don't get revenue in and don't spend money, that's not a business, right? That's an inactive business. So that's the purpose of that club.
I'm sorry,
by
all
calendar.
clubs?
All
Yeah,
clubs,
there's just-
all clubs.
If there's money involved, like if they
All
have no
clubs.
money at all, it probably wouldn't matter, but once
then they
they
wouldn't be in the
take money
extra
in, then it
activity
becomes,
fund.
yeah.
So if it's a club in which there's just money for the advisor,
Yeah.
we're not talking about
No.
that.
No, that would
We're
be
talk-
running through the general fund.
Right.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
Schedule B, that's.
Yeah.
Got it.
What if there's a club and as part of their, informing them so that, club, we love transportation, we're the transportation planning club, and they want to go to the city and check out the Second Avenue subway, and it's going to require them to pay for transportation to get there.
So these are the clubs that, the reason why they're in the extra classroom activity fund is because they're collecting revenues and spending dollars. Other clubs would run through the general fund if they were doing a class
Well,
trip.
in your example, that would be fine because they'd be active because they would have most likely have collected money and then spent it. The only issue that's existing here is not to close the chess club. It's just saying if you know that you either don't need the money, then return it, and they're inactive for a year. I guess the law says that they either have to spend like something out of it, or then they would then turn their funds over to the student union of the high school, and then I guess the student union would have the ability to reestablish them with money at a later point. And again, these are controlled by the buildings, not by that's by the controller, the student activity controller. So these are just like, for whatever reason, nitpicky things, not Susan
Right.
sets up, but that the state with extra classroom want, like, their ideas if there's money, and then not that the club would have to close, but the money would either have to be sent back to student union or spent.
Because if the club didn't need the money, then maybe it has better use in another club. Like the chess club, then if you're going to have the money, and then use to go to a chess event, right? But so it's saying, where is that money? Not that the club is not, you could have 100 people, 100 students in the chess club, right? But if they're not taking that money and spending it, then maybe another club needs that money, right? So that's the whole purpose of this. So there's very minimal.
It's not
Yeah.
something.
Right. And then a payroll, there was a minor recommendation here about the payroll change report. The reviews are being performed by the district treasurer on the payroll change report, meaning any addition or deletions to the employees' records, really, for the payroll change amounts. But although they've been doing, we're just saying that district treasurer should sign off on those, right? Because this is the auditing concept. If it's not documented, then it isn't done. Okay? So although we see the check, you might have check marks and highlights, and you see the process going on, it's just that sign off has to
Yeah,
be there.
I sign off on, we do a payroll, before the payroll takes place, I sit with the payroll clerk, we go through everything that's going to be paid, and then subsequent, I sign off on all the registers, like I run the reports, and I get the after, and then I sign it, and then she signs it. But this would then be, in addition, another report that's a payroll change report, which is it's like an auditing report, so it would show if there was any like subsequent change made to somebody, like either their appointment changed or they got additional money, that would, if I ran that report, if there was no activity, it would just have nothing, and if there was any activity, but, so it's also included, but it's a good report to run and then sign, like, as a separate, like she had talked about, we have a lot of controls in there, but last year there was a thing that, because I didn't initial every piece of a journal entry, they were like, well, how do we know you did it? But they didn't, so
reviewed it,
it's
right.
just,
Right.
so then we have to then I just have to, we have to change the process. So this one, they wanted me to sign that report as well, so.
And then the another item what we talked about was the outsource IT vendor management. Okay, so if any IT function is outsourced, okay, the systems, the IT systems, then the district should request what they call an SSAE 18 report, which is an external report done by external auditors testing the controls that system comprises. Okay?
But Susan, I just want to say, Tony and I went to BOCES today for a meeting that
Yes.
they actually went over this, but
Yes.
They call it SOC, SOC 2
Do they
compliant.
obtain a SOC
They
2?
do,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, so maybe if you present that to
Yeah.
me before we go to final, we
They
look
could,
at that.
they won't give you a copy of their report.
But you can go
That's
there.
very sensitive information, but you can go there and look at the report.
Oh, okay, so I will
So-
speak with the...
But they are certified, it's on their website, that they are a SOC 2 approved.
Okay, good.
And that's for the last 3 years, they said, right? Started in
Look, we
14.
looked at SOC 2.
Well, they said I mean, 2014, depends if you're counting the 17-18 school year, but it did say,
I
they
think
did say
everybody doesn't know
4.
what the problem was. I
Sorry.
think that's the way to
It's just,
get
so as the district has their financial statement
Oh,
audited,
Jesus.
right, to give to get an opinion on the financial statement, the BOCES, I think you retain the services of BOCES for certain systems included with the technology, and the controls over that system, they would ask BOCES or any vendor, not just BOCES, a vendor who was supplying those systems, how were those controls tested by somebody independent than that vendor to say that the controls were working over that system? Okay, so we had asked for that report. So I will follow up to see to see if this comment is stated.
I guess that's the problem, they will not supply it to us, but they said you can go there,
And
you know.
it is on their website that they are SOC 2
Okay, so we will
level.
get... Then,
Susan, just to follow up on
Sure.
that, because I was particularly interested, because we're talking about our student data, we're talking about our staff social security numbers, a lot of really, really sensitive information. So if in fact they do have this SOC 2 and
So
you see it, would
I
that
am
give
not-
you the confidence that to know that our
I
data
am
is
not,
being protected?
yeah, so I'm not an IT, I'm not the IT technology director of the firm, so I will speak with the IT partner, and he will, well, we were at BOCES doing a presentation recently, right? Maybe 2 months ago, right?
Oh, yeah, you did a
So
presentation
we
at
were
the,
not
but this
aware
is
of
at the
SOC 2,
BOCES.
but
that's
he will
you.
look at that, and I will get his opinion as to whether or not a SOC 2 will fulfill an SSAE 18.
Thank you.
Okay, I will look into that. And then the second is cyber risk awareness training, meaning, when you get those emails, and you should should I open this up or not? Because it might, so cyber awareness. So we suggested that the district look into having a cyber risk awareness consultation, because even within our firm, there are, and other companies that I audit, there is cyber risk awareness ongoing. Okay, so and that would.
I just have a quick question, going back to the BOCES. So like in the warrants for tonight, there's a section that has BOCES, and it talks about emerging technology, it talks about remote backup services from BOCES. So is that what we're talking
Yes,
about?
yes.
Part of it, yeah.
Part of it,
Right.
Okay.
And it's not only both, it's just not to isolate BOCES.
Right.
Any vendor who supplies IT services, right? Meanwhile, meaning that you do not physically own that software, right? You're not, that request this SSAE 18 report. Okay.
And just for the quantity, I know in our budget, BOCES with our technology, do we pay close, it's quite large. We
Yeah,
pay
it's like
to $1
close,
million?
yeah, over $1 million.
Yeah, so
So
that's,
it's any vendor. So if you if you're a private corporation or even a public corporation, and you use an outside payroll service, right? That outside payroll service would supply an SSAE 18 report. I want my IT, I would go to my IT director so that he could look at and see, perhaps visit BOCES and look at that report very expeditiously, so to determine that, okay? And basically that was, in here, also in part of there was another section, in part of the letter, which was some of the internal auditor comments, which management has responded to, that they're in the process of wrapping up. So at the end of that process, the audit process, as I said, the district received an unmodified opinion. It was a very intensive process, but as I can see just by reviewing all the documents and through the interviews and through the on-site auditing, the whole year is a financially intensive process. So I commend the management. the new superintendent, who was here, well, we were here, I was towards the, in July, we met, and then in August, and he was very actively involved. I appreciate that. And the district treasurer and her office, and really the district, because it takes a lot to accomplish fulfilling the services, right? But also meeting within the budget constraints, right? So that was the presentation.
I just have one quick question. Did you say something about there's a database you have to put deficiencies into? Did you say?
Oh, so not deficiencies. So as part of the process, the district usually would have to file an ST3 report, which is the state report for their financials. And then they would send in, either on a CD or in paper, the financial statements, the management letter, and the responses to that management letter. This year, which is not part of the firm's process, they set up a portal.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's nothing different than we.
Is the purpose of that to build some sort of database so you can study across districts?
No, I don't think. I mean, we've always sent.
Because
I mean, there's always
useful
been
information to have.
No, it is, but I'm saying all districts have always been required to file your audit report and your responses in the management letter to the State Controller's Office and the New York State Education Department by October 15th. This year, they're just making it electronic through the portal. It's just how we're submitting
you're sending
it.
a document through a portal.
Yeah.
You're not
Yes.
populating a database.
Right.
No.
And
But there is ways.
ST3 is, if you look at the ST3 for each district, that is where the data, that's been ongoing for years, where the ST3 is basically taking the financial data and submitting it
So we have to do that every year. Like, it takes we just actually submitted ours. After you get your audit reports, it takes about 3 weeks. It's all reporting of all your financial, and it is a lot of data. There's all different reports within it that you have to submit. And then along with it, obviously, the ST3, though, it has to match your audit report, or else, like, you would not, but it's broken down a little bit differently.
So basically, this was, the state is making, it's a more efficient process in order to accumulate all the data. So which I
Or
think
that when they
is-
come
which
here,
is
they don't
good.
ask me for something that I've submitted.
However, was that way, then they'll know who, they can
Yeah.
run reports themselves to see who has submitted and who has
Yeah,
not.
it's
But I think
easier.
it makes it easier for the district to do this through a portal as well.
It makes me feel better that it's
Yeah.
there, Because we used to
yes.
send it certified mail, and that makes it a lot better.
Okay, and I think that just came out a few weeks ago.
It's
that
just
we-
this year.
This year that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being so involved. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And thank
It's
you,
been a
Maureen,
pleasure
and
to work with
office.
your new
Yeah, thank
superintendent.
you. Trojan work.
Okay, next on the agenda is the Schedule B audit process. Maureen, would that be you?
Yeah, I could.
Maureen's office is going to conduct it. Technically, we're just going to send out an email. We talked to the HTA, we talked to Nate Morgan about the fact that it's coming. I had mentioned it to you all in an update a few weeks ago. We're just going to ask for some information because there is no agreed upon responsibility for each Schedule B. So we're trying to get to that as part of the negotiation process this year.
And yeah, we think it'll be helpful. I mean, not only, it's a good time to do it when you're kind of going into negotiations for both sides, because I think, even for I'm sure Nate or everybody, and including people, sometimes when people are doing jobs, you don't know, people may be doing more than we know, and we want to correctly compensate people, or there may be things that aren't as efficient, whatever the case may be, but it's a good exercise to do. But it was also part of, we do have some job responsibilities, which I believe may be outdated in terms of the Schedule B, and even occasionally we'll have a person who's interested in applying to a Schedule B, and what we're able to provide for them really isn't, I would say, significant enough for them to understand what their responsibilities are, and there's definitely depending upon who does it, some people understand the responsibilities, even at different building levels for similar positions, are not always consistent. So I think it's just a good time to do it. And it's nothing that we want people to write a book, but just we'll send them kind of a standardized template, and they can fill it in. And then if they wish to add additional information, they can do it. And then we can look at it together as a group, and then either, we may then make recommendations based upon, from our end, that people aren't being either correctly compensated or.
Sure.
Yeah.
And, I just want to put, for anybody who's watching, what Schedule B is.
So, yeah, that's a good idea, that's true.
And correct me if I get it wrong,
Okay.
but it's it's stipends or extra money that we pay to people who serve as our coaches, as our department chairs, as the heads of our clubs.
Yes.
Those
Theater position, I mean, those are also
are sort of
clubs.
the main
yeah.
categories.
Right.
Often, many of our full-time staff, pick these jobs up to help out with the school more and to increase their salary. Sometimes it's people who that's their only job that they do with the school, but that's what Schedule B refers to.
And there are definitely a lot of times, just like I said, I think it'll be helpful for a lot of people, because even if it's just lunchroom duty and just to make sure that it's consistent with what the person's doing and going building to building, you'll find sometimes although people may be compensated the same, people's responsibilities may differ in terms of their role at a building level.
Sure, I think it's a healthy thing
Right.
to do every now and then.
Every 10 years. I think that was the last time we did it.
Okay.
It's a lot of work.
It is, yeah, so.
Anything else on the Schedule B audit process? Next on our agenda is public comment, but we don't have the public, so we don't have public comment. Next, we have our business items, which would be, actually, the first one, let's take that, let's not do that as part of a consent agenda. That's our resolution to adopt the code of conduct. And I know we said we may address some of these issues in policy meetings going forward. Christine, I know you had something that you had thought about with the code of conduct, but I don't know if it still stays with you now to make a comment.
No, I addressed it
It's
with...
resolved,
Yeah,
okay.
I think so. I think
Okay.
it's...
Okay, so does anybody have any comments on the code of conduct? Okay, so then let's go back to consent agenda. So under business, we have adopting the code of code of conduct. I do have a question about one of the business items, and I don't know if
Yes.
anybody else does. Maureen, I was just going to ask you, I saw that there's the bill for the flooring in the
Yes.
cafeteria, and it seems to cover a lot of it. We had to, just for the public, we had an unexpected cost, I guess, what was it, that,
Well, we had
was
to
it
put
a
down
leveling of
subflooring.
it?
We had
Right.
to put down subflooring that was leveled because the floor was not level.
Right.
When they started pulling out the tiles for the asbestos removal, they pulled up the subfloor as well, so they had to re-level everything
Yeah, no, even right.
and put in joints and all.
So what did that, we made an estimate of what we thought that would be out. My question is, what did it finally turn out? I
Okay,
couldn't tease it out.
so there's one bill here for 62,000, which was in line with what the actual initial estimate was, and that was for the new floor to be installed. So that was, and then the other bill, I just pulled up that one first, was for the change order, which ended up being less than we had initially anticipated. I think we had sent out it was 26,000 was the change order. I think there was an initial number, I want to say it was 35 that I may have emailed. That was the first estimate they gave us based upon what they, which he did say to me, this might be at the high end, but in case it ends up being more work than we thought. So this in fact is a change order for 26,000. And I think, although it is a lot, and he did come in and he did change down his rate. I mean, not that it's that significant, but I spoke to him at length about the overtime rate, and in fact, there is a overtime rate that people in the union do receive, but I also had asked him, which wasn't a huge amount, but he did reduce it, because I had said, well, then you could at least reduce some of your overhead, which is why there's that $20 discount, which still gives him a little bit overhead, but not as much as the initial amount. So, after he came in, he did reduce that for us. But it did end up being a little, but the one thing is that it was done right, and there was a lot of, layers of flooring that were there, and we did in fact check the cameras to make sure, in his crew, we confirmed the work hours and the amount of people that were working, because we did have people here, but they didn't watch them the entire time, and Joe Matarana did end up watching a lot of it to just make sure that, in fact, that we had the amount of we wanted to calculate out the hours to make sure that, in fact, that's what it was. And we did get the certified payrolls from them, so it did match up with that.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions on any of that? And, sorry, procedural question. Now I'm looking, they do seem to be separate sections. Can we do them both together?
You can do A, B, and C all together. too.
Okay. I see. Let's see, CSE?
Yeah, it's all part of business.
Okay. Okay, does anybody have any questions on CSE placements? Okay, so then, may I have a motion to adopt as a consent agenda everything under business items, which is the resolution on the code of conduct, the business items listed under section B, and the placement and our services for CSE? a second, please?
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Next is personnel.
A bunch of just teacher aide appointments, monitors, part-time, 4 hours a day kind of thing. The most significant ones that you may want to just be aware of, Maureen Bassman is going to move into a civil service title. She has been assigned as a teacher aide in the athletic director's office. So that is just to reflect that. She's not resigning and leaving her job. She's just basically switching titles, so she had to resign effectively to take the other job. Kimberly Burke is the first grade teacher over at Hillside who took over for Erin Rayner. And she has started, and they had a meet and greet, not this past week, the week before. And nothing else is...
I just want to mention that on Romeo Spiniello, number 13, that really should be from a .8, not .85, to a 1.0.
So he's not going to be a 1.05?
No. Well, I mean, at one point, because he was going to teach over his section, but then it was confirmed that he was, in fact, a 1.0.
Okay.
There's a little bit of back and forth on the
He can be a
schedule.
1.05 technically, but he's
Yeah.
not going to be in the
Correct.
Right, I think he had a
Yeah.
1.2
Yeah.
last year, right?
Yeah.
There's also Mary Keaton, too.
Mary Kate, she was already slid over to be our kindergarten teacher as opposed to first grade leave replacement, and for that reason, we gave her credit for her previous teaching experience. She comes experienced, so she's one of our kindergarten teachers.
Any other comments or questions on personnel? Okay, so may I have a motion to adopt as a consent agenda the Section A appointments and the Section B leave of absences?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Next is approving the minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes from September 25th? And a second?
Oh, second, it's from September 11th.
Oh, I'm sorry, September 11th, sorry, my bad. All in favor?
Yes, second, yes.
All in favor? Okay, committee reports, facilities. Did you want to lead the discussion on that, or?
Well, I mean, I wasn't there.
You weren't there? I'm sorry.
It's okay. I mean, I could
Does
lead it.
anybody lead it, whatever you like?
Whatever you want. I mean, I know that you are.
Yeah, I mean, so we started off, we talked about
I'm so sorry.
I'm happy to lead it.
I think that was it.
I have some information for you.
So the topics were the goalposts, and we had Joe Martirano and Jesse Merchant and Terry, who's been taking care of the fields, were there talking about what they thought we should do with this sort of never-ending issue. Long story short, in the end, basically the idea, there were a couple of points, I think Jesse put it really well. He said, right now we have options, which is something we usually don't have around here, and he felt that would be better to leave them up. I think there's some, most of us, I think, were pretty agreed that it's not just a one-year decision, because you have to see how the fields hold up to our use and the use that, the community wants to look at with them as well. So it probably will take at least 2 or 3 years to figure out if we're able to rotate and keep everything going and keep the grass all good, just with the level that we have here, without having to close fields for a season or a resodding or whatever. So I think that one, we're just going to leave them where they are. The other question that had come up was also, how do we use the fields for community purposes, and what kind of access do you give to the community? We have ASO, we have, Rivertown, a bunch of youth soccer leagues. Occasionally we have like a youth lacrosse league. We'll have baseball, we'll have football. I guess they're just starting up another
Basketball.
kids football thing. What's that?
Basketball in addition, when you
Right,
sort of
the
think
indoor-
about it.
indoor-
We were talking about it all.
Comprehensively.
So all the facilities usage that really for sports though, not for.
Right.
We didn't really talk about.
I did get some
wasn't
information
sure.
from the other districts on the question, which I can just email out that answer. There was some follow-up on like, what do other people in the river towns, because we're limiting some of the usage right now because the fields are new. So there's, people looking, ASO and different groups who are
Right. And I think the things that came up was, just because we've done it one way in the past doesn't mean we continue to do that. I mean, we're in a new situation in terms of what we have. In some ways, it looks like we have a lot more, but we also know how bad things were. So you don't want to get back to that bad situation either. So I think that's going to take a little bit more thinking through. But we'll have to come up with, as a facilities subgroup, we'll come up with a policy and then sort of put that up on the table and then make a recommendation to the full board. But it needs to become more of a regulation so that people know, okay, when the athletic director says that the field is closed on Saturday and that's going to happen by 8 o'clock on Saturday mornings, then ASO knows they can't use it, or they know that they can't use it after. One of the issues there also is that those seasons tend to be longer than our school seasons, so that when you might typically be able to take care of a field in the fall, starting like, November 1, ASO is going until the weekend before Thanksgiving. So if they're still using your fields, then you can't go out and you can't do all the kind of maintenance things that you need to do on the field to help it, come back up. So there are some considerations like that that have to be kind of worked out as well. So I think it's more procedural, but also sort of a philosophy of are we going to come up with a new way of sharing the goods? Because we do want them to stay. We spend a lot of money to get to this really good place, and we have to be conscious of how we use the resources. So, and then there was one other thing.
Well, we talked about.
Just to follow up on that, and I do think it's a really hard situation, and I think it's something that we may need, a discussion with the community with, because then, we do. Terry, our maintenance man, was very informative, and he kept talking about the idea of compaction, and the more we use these fields, the more we put them at risk. But we did make assurances, the board, did make assurances to the public during the bond discussion that the public's use would not change. So I think we need a very engaged discussion with the community about, how do we make this work for everybody in a way that keeps the fields and keeps, the promises that the board made as well. So I see that in our future.
And then we talked about a lot of facilities upgrades that Maureen wants to spend money on.
Yeah. No, I don't know did Joe email, because he was.
I haven't seen it.
Okay, all right, then I'll follow up with him, because he gave it to me that day, and I said, sure, email. So I think I've discussed or mentioned to the board here about the 5-year facilities plan that we're required to have by the state, but it's like a living, working document that every year we update it based upon the condition of our facilities, and things tend to change. So there are necessities, and there may be things that are more wants or needs, and some that are structural. And we started to discuss that you should be starting to think about the next bond, because there's still there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And although even if you started to speak about a bond this year, it would be 2 to 3 years until we saw that work happen, because the state takes a year to approve. Typically, it takes the district a year to prepare. Takes time to get it out to the voters, to inform the public. So we have items such as the middle school auditorium, which is not something that the district can afford to fix without a bond. Mm-hmm. It's upward of $2 million, if not more, to do it. Well, there's probably asbestos up the wazoo once you got into that entire room. I'll just give you, like the cafeteria alone, the abatement there with the air monitoring was over $120,000. That would be worse, because it's going to be the ceiling, the walls, and the floor.
And it's a bigger space.
It's a bigger space, and we only did the floor. So just that, we had, there were just things that need to be done. We have windows, we have the other half of the roofs of both buildings that are now, in the next 3 years, is going to be needed to be done. We did half of the roof here. We had done the half of the roof 20 some odd years ago. So time-wise, in 3 or 4 years, we should be doing a new roof, another half of a roof at Hillside here. So minimally, there's $5 million on the low end to $10 million worth of work that needs to be addressed in the next 3 years. And this needs to be, because that would be another bond issue, which would increase your debt service, although that is not included in your tax cap calculation. It's just you have to be mindful, because it will increase the taxes in the district.
And Maureen, 2 things that you had pointed out that were very helpful for me. One is the bond cycle.
Yes.
That I think that we had gone, the last bond we did, there was a very long interval between that and the prior bond. And that's what many of us are used to, who say have kids, that's all we know from it. I think it's important to educate the public that was unusual, and that school districts tend to, put out bonds more frequently than that.
I think I told you, and I don't know if it's still true, but I want to say as of last year, the year before, we had the lowest debt service in Westchester County, which is huge.
and
That means
debt-
we issue the least debt and do the least work on our buildings, but I think our buildings are as good as a lot of other districts, so we have done a good job in maintaining our building, but there are things like you said, because of we would have done a bond most likely in 2008 had the economic downturn not happened. And we were already a couple years past when we probably should have done one. But we're always mindful that although we get a lot of state aid back on the money, there is still some impact to our taxpayers.
Well, that's what the other piece I wanted to point out, is that if we do our improvement work through the bond, not for the board, really for the public, it's a much less expensive way for us to do it, because for every dollar the state gives us, we're only repaying 60-something.
Right, well, we get 42% back.
A bond project, the state reimburses the district for 42,
Okay, so
42 cents on the dollar.
Rather than using our operating budget to do these,
Right.
to do these repairs, it's a much more, financially beneficial way for us to do it. So, being the lowest debt service in Westchester is not the greatest thing.
Right.
So
Plus,
it's
the
just,
operating budget goes towards the tax cap, right? But you're saying that the debt service doesn't contribute.
It's excluded. You can add it on after. But that being said, I will say that it does matter, because when you look at similar sized districts to us, they still do pay that debt back. Like a Dobbs Ferry debt service payments each year, although they got the state aid coming in, is about 5 times what, so it is still money, like whether it's excluded or not. I think people, even if it's excluded, but you say, okay, but your taxes are going up 4%, they would still be not happy about it. So I think there is a combination that I like to think we've done a good job, because I think there's things that I think districts have spent money on that they've redone the work multiple times. I don't necessarily believe the people with the highest debt service are doing the best job either. I think we did a good job for what it was, but I do agree with you we're at a point now that we need to just be mindful and be looking to do some work every 5 years, because even this upcoming year, our recommendation is going to be that we put another maybe $500,000 in the interfund transfer, because that's just to stay, these are not like wish list items, this is like infrastructure, and if you don't plan for it, it happens, and it's a mid-year situation, you do have to come up with that money, so I think we're doing a lot of work in the district, and a lot of, districts, although they have issue bonds, a lot of districts like us who even issue, but Dobbs Ferry, the last time they issued a $15 million bond to our $8 million bond, and they had already done a bond 5 years prior to that. They also are still doing $300,000 to $400,000 worth of interfund work as well. So, I think if you look dollar for dollar, we actually have still spent less regardless of our debt service. So, I really think we have a great, Buildings and Grounds Department, and that's why we've been fortunate.
and a great district treasurer.
No, thank you. But I do think we need to start speaking about that, because that needs to be played into looking at your finances for the next 5 years. Although it's not tax cap relevant, it is relevant to taxes.
Tax
relevant,
Yeah.
pocket relevant.
So is that something the facilities can?
Well, Joe actually had the plan, and I had asked him to distribute it to the board members, so I will have him send that out to everybody tomorrow. So it'll just give you a snapshot of what, at the last time, where we were. But I think, again, there's things like, maybe, like the middle school auditorium can be a priority or cannot be. It depends on the district and where you think it should be. I think it's... No, it should be, but I think the reason is because it hasn't been used, that it was like a space, like a gym or something that we use all the time that had to be done, so... Joe...
Like your attic.
Right.
You don't know how bad it is, and
Right.
you have to go get something.
And you definitely
I think it's a
don't want to
UC
live there.
Was it good when you were there? Was it good when you were in the district?
No, it was actually locked off.
For years.
For years. It was locked. Nobody used it.
Right.
Middle school.
Auditorium.
Middle school
Christina was a
auditorium.
student.
But the issues with
It was locked off.
the reality
Yeah,
is that we're looking at our number of kids,
Right. We need the space too, yeah.
Like right now we have an issue where we have nowhere to put our 3rd grade strings group
Right.
physically in Hillside, and we have to address that issue.
Right.
But those kids are going to come up, right? And not to say that we need an auditorium necessarily, but
that's
we do have a
right,
big
right.
space that we could really
But it's a space.
put to use.
Right.
You can do a whole lot of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's, yeah, so that it's also, that's right. So we had spoke about that, the Facilities Committee meeting, that, as we continue to experience larger growth, or if as an example, if there was an expansion of special ed programs, or that we would need space. So that's we could move certain, say the music up, I always move the music up there because it seems like the logical.
Add in a dance program.
Right, dance, music.
Or even expand our theater program. I mean,
Right.
there's a lot that could be done for whatever we want
Right.
to do with that space.
And then we could repurpose those rooms that are available, like down here, into other classroom spaces. So also, we have been using classrooms down near the gym, but that's not the best instructional space for people because there are gym classes going on and locker rooms. So if we were to be able to recapture that space, then we could move any classroom. It's not the TV studio's down there, but I think most teachers wouldn't say that's the right,
But it's
Tony?
also different because they're closing that off, like when they're
Right.
recording, like they.
No, but I'm saying some of the classrooms that were down there,
That's
people
different.
tended to not want it to be, not to be down there because there's gym classes and locker
noisy.
rooms, and it's noisy. So I think that now that people haven't wanted to use those rooms as much, it may be, we need the space. I mean, space everyone wants,
Right.
all the time.
Just quickly,
Yes.
I remember Eileen bringing up, I don't know, a couple of meetings ago about solar panels, and it wasn't possible on the roof in Hillside or whatever. If we are looking at roofing, I don't know the viability of it on other buildings.
Yeah.
I don't.
You'd have to, basically, you'd have to go back and to vendors and to see what was available at the time. And it's really dependent on what tax incentives there are.
Okay.
Offered by the state or NIPA or, our power providers and things like that. So it's very dependent on the financials.
I see.
Which are, offset terrifically. So that was one.
Well,
of the
this
problems.
roof couldn't even support the solar
This-
structurally.
Yeah, it got downsized several different ways, but this one, they couldn't verify the engineering in the, above the cafeteria, so that roof was off. You can't use it.
Right, the Washington wing.
No one's willing to say.
No
this will hold
company
it
would
up.
put something on.
So this building has sort of a limited amount to it that
see.
can be put up. At Hillside, there were 2 different roof ages, and because of where you could put it and the shading from the hillside, that big hill that's on the
Right.
the coming in on the right, basically the project shrank and shrank. It went from one incentive pool to a different incentive pool, and the price popped, and it's kind of like, okay, I give up. I mean, it was just,
They wanted us to do
out
like
we were gonna have it
carports,
everywhere.
right? Yeah.
well, they basically, they said, if you want to do all your
outside
roofs
of the
right this
fields.
minute, that's fine,
Right.
but we weren't going to do all the roofs right this minute. So it is definitely something that, a future board should look into. When you do have roofs that, if the whole building in Hillside is less than 5 years old, then you have enough space to make it probably a much more attractive, financing arrangement, and that would be worthwhile going back to. Because it is definitely possible. It's just that
We had to redo our roof now. We were like, well, in the other half, which we wanted to wait till it was like ready to be replaced. So in order to get the space, we would have had to redo our whole roof, which would have more than doubled the project because the replacement we just did is the smaller part of the roof. So it would have been like another 1.5 million for us to get
So
the
they were
roof.
like, well, you can put it on and take it off when you need to do the roof.
But then we have to pay for that, which would have been a few $100,000, yeah.
I mean, there was a relatively small margin anyway of possible savings, and at that point, it was,
It was actually,
Opportunity
wait 5
cost
years.
wasn't there.
well, the issue is that the district, we pay much less than most people pay for their energy because we get it, yeah. I mean, I wish I could pay what we pay for our electric. It's a really good rate. It's much lower than like Con Ed rates, so.
The rates actually lower. It's not just that we use.
It's not that we have no air.
Oh, no, we're using it, but we pay a much lower, we have it through NIPA, which is a regulated,
That would be nice.
Okay, is there anything else about the facilities meeting or facilities? Okay. Audit, I don't think we need to discuss, because we
Got it?
we talked about audit. Student report, and I'll just put it out there that Parker and Elliot and I, and whoever from the board wants to join, are just going to meet at some point in the next few weeks to talk about how to, let's take a look at this role and figure out, and actually, Tony,
And Mr. DiPietro and I spoke as well about Parker's role in just, at the very least, giving us an update of what's going on in the high school, but we also talked about having students from each of the other schools as well, once a month, and so that'll start next month, I think the October 10th meeting. So get ready, Parker, it's coming. No, I'm just kidding. You're ready.
and while we have you on the spot, anything you want to share as student report at this point?
I think at this point, it's sort of starting to set up and get ready for homecoming. It seems far away, but it's actually approaching pretty quickly. So I think all of the clubs and student union and all our teams are just working to figure all of that out.
Okay, sounds good, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, board goals. So there's an attachment, which Doug very nicely put together, thank you, that had lists 4 proposed goals, and I know there was some talk amongst us in emails. Are they board goals? Are they district goals? Is the title important? And I guess I'll just open up to discussion. Any comments on the goals themselves, or how we're processing this, or anything having to do with the goals?
Well, Tony and I can frame it a little bit. And just to give you an idea of where these all came from, these are conversations that Lisa and Tony and I had, which is, I think, why my opinion is it's more appropriate to call these district goals. That's my personal opinion I will share. If anyone else has another opinion, it'd be great to hear it. Because they are, I think, Jody shared and a few other people, these are the things that Tony is going to have to own and we're going to support as a district. And so what I wanted to do is see how did they line up against other lists of goals that boards have put together dating back to 2012. So in that spreadsheet, you can see down the left-hand column is kind of and this is an attachment in board docs. In the left-hand column is just topical areas within which you could have a goal. There could be more, but this is kind of over the last 5 years, all the areas that that this district, that Hastings has used. And the one at the bottom is a topical area that has never, and that's why it's in red, been used, which is diversity as a topical area. So this is the first year over the last 5 years we're actually proposing a district-wide goal around diversity. And then you can see there's places where there are blank spots, where that year there was no goal having to do with that topical area. And so with that, thought that would be helpful to kind of give some context. There's some spots in there where there's not a lot of detail. There were, I think, at times like whole pages written on these. They just didn't have room in a matrix to put a whole page. And I didn't think anyone was going to be able to really read through that anyways, but suffice it to say, it wasn't categorically that different than other things you see in that row, so I think we can all get the gist. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Tony, and he can talk a little bit about the 4 chosen for this year in context and, some other thoughts around them.
And I would throw out, just for anybody watching, we should probably read the goals because nobody has them in front of them.
Well, they have board docs. They're on board docs.
No, but I'm just saying if anybody is, late night watching on WHOH or whatever, they won't know what we're talking about.
So I'll take them if it's okay with all of you. I would like to look at them out of order, actually, just because I see 3 of them as being 1, 2, 3. Sorry, I want to make sure I got the number right. Yeah, I see 3 of them as being very much interconnected and really kind of an umbrella one over that. So start with one that stands out on its own, although not necessarily, but is different. The notion of communication and engagement. So looking as it's verbalized now, engagement. So promote engagement, communication, and transparency, both within our district and with the district and community by creating opportunities for discussion, learning, and listening. So that is very much aligned to my own priority that I established for myself as your superintendent this year. But I also think it speaks to a broader need as a community, and something that I can tell you in my short time here, I've been getting a lot of feedback about the level of communication that has been established, I guess more particularly by me, but in general between the district and the community. And so I think that is an important goal. I see that being an ongoing kind of thing. I don't think that's necessarily a one-year goal, which is why it seems it has been in here more than once, because I think it's an evolution, right? And it's something that is constantly a focal point, because we are representing a community, right? Whether we're representing our kids, our staff, our families, and so that work is incredibly important to me, and I think it's reflective of a goal that the board shares with me in terms of communication and engagement.
Yeah,
So-
and I think the sharing is, there definitely were feelings, we started to hear about the past few years that people, there were things that people just didn't know that were going on, and I don't mean, little things, just sort of bigger things. So I think to, just make sure that, I don't want to say over-communicate, but we need to make sure that the essentials are getting to people, and that's very important.
I agree. I think to that point, though, we also need to be mindful on the way that communication, intent versus impact, and I think that's something we always have to keep in our minds. I think while the intent is always to over communicate, to make sure the information is getting out there, recognize that the impact on the other end for everyone is not the same. And I can give a very particular example. As you know, we had a couple of incidents recently, a couple that we attacked sort of as a district around swastikas that were found in the middle school area of the Farragut complex. And so we couldn't target where that happened and who did that, so we generalized it looking at the whole complex. And then recently there was, last week there was an incident around race with our middle school students. So I can tell you that communication has gone out to our community, and I've actually had people reach out to me specifically to say, so there's almost a little bit of concern around that level of communication and how we're dealing with those issues. Are we overreacting? Are we only pointing out the negative things happening in our district? I don't think we are. So again, just to be mindful of impact and intent, and balancing it, and where is it, where do we draw the line? What, do we ever exclude a group, not exclude a group, intentionally, not intentionally? So a lot of things to consider around communication, and the notion of over-communication, which I'm very comfortable with, but recognizing that the impact is not the same for everyone. Not everyone is looking for that communication, and in fact, some people are concerned by the patterns of communication, but also the content of the communication. So I just want us to be mindful of the broader implications, not just people who we may be hearing from or not hearing from. That's all.
And it may well be a dance that we have to do to find the sweet spot.
Yeah, and I think it'll take time, and I think it also takes a level of trust. And to that end, I think over-communicating is important, because that's how we build trust, so we know what's going on. But just being mindful as we move forward, we may want to establish a sort of clearer understanding of, all right, this we send an email out for, this maybe we don't need to send an email, or whatever, and that kind of thing. And again, email's not the only thing, right? But just looking at that specifically. So that one is very important in terms of a priority that I've established for myself, but also I think as a group for the board. The other three that I see kind of linked very closely together start with that curriculum and instruction. And so I'll just read them out and then just tell you how I see them all very much connected there. Curriculum and learning, so maintain high academic standards while using a whole child lens to evolve teaching approaches from our youngest to oldest students. Ensure we're fostering social, emotional, and physical development that is critical to creating lifelong learners. And so that's kind of the one that I see as the overarching that really covers a lot of the work, if not the most important part of our work here. And the other two that are connected to it are the special education piece. And so to read that one, under the guidance of the special education audit report, which we have sort of reframed as an action plan. We're using that to develop an action plan. So we're trying to not just refer to the audit, but refer to our action plan, which has been informed by the audit. Work towards promoting, developing, and sustaining a culture of inclusion for special education students, and ensure that these students are provided with opportunities to reach their potentials. So while aspects of the audit are specific to special education, there are some significant themes that are generally about instruction and best practice, which goes back to curriculum and instruction and learning. So those two, I think, are very much meshed together, and it is something we've talked about. So Laura, Tesfa, and I have started going to each building to share our report that we shared with you guys on August 1st, and with a lot of intentionality focusing on the fact that this is an instruction thing, a general education thing, with components that are specific to special education, because we want to make sure everyone understands this is going to impact all of us, not just if you're a co-teacher or a resource room teacher or a self-contained. It's going to impact all of us. And the last one, which is new, and I commend you all for putting it out there as something to look at for ourselves as a goal, diversity. So create opportunities for discussion and understanding about issues involving race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, disability, and other areas where perceived differences interfere with learning, community building, celebration, and understanding. That one also is gigantic in many ways, and but also I think very much connected to learning and instruction. And so this has definitely been a focal point for us as a team internally in my short time here. In fact, we are exploring opportunities for dedicated professional development around racism, around race and racial justice as a starting point, but also being mindful of where that falls against the broader backdrop of social justice, because we're looking at systems of inequity, really, in essence. And those are often socially constructed, but they don't just impact one group. It's several subgroups. And they could be gender-related, they could be disability-related, they could be orientation, the list, there are many isms. And so we're not going to address them all in one fell swoop. But starting that work, and I think targeting specifically the work around race and racism, which is actually a difficult place to begin because it is an uncomfortable thing to unpack, is probably the most important place to start, because it begins with levels of self-awareness. And that avails you to discussions around the other isms as well. To that point of diversity, I can tell you that I've received many communications from families about their concerns specific to either their child or their experiences where they feel like they've been othered, right, for the lack of a better phrase. And it's not about race. There are ones that are, but they're about gender identity. They are about things like how we work with our children who are introverted and what that looks like. How do we work with our children who are classified in some way and might have either an emotional disability or cognitive disability or not, and what the implications are of that. And so it is, in my opinion, a massive goal to be focusing on, but so important. And I think it is one that we will be dedicated to for years, because it has to start with professional development before it actually really impacts our kids and our instruction. So that to me is where I see those all kind of falling together under the umbrella of learning, instruction, curriculum, is special education, is diversity. And not that communication doesn't fall under that, but just kind of looking at that a little bit on the side. So
I do just want to say this about two things about diversity. One is that I'm incredibly proud of our school district and our middle school for just taking this on before Charlottesville.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the spring, where we have our team of I think it was 3 teachers, 3 or 4, I'm not sure.
3 teachers, I think, did the
curriculum for classes called Courageous Conversations, where our teachers are helping our students learn how to begin to have conversations on race and racism. And I feel that we're doing this work. I don't know if other schools are or aren't, but I'm very, very proud of our district and of our middle school. And then just a small point on diversity, I see in the list, I know we have a catch-all at the end, but I think we should also include the word religion in there, because I think that was probably just an oversight.
No, that's a great point.
Since I drafted it, it's an oversight.
No, and that's one that's already come up as a thing. And we Lisa and I had an opportunity, just coincidentally, to be in the same space a couple of weeks ago for Teachers College hosted a social justice Saturday. And one of the things that, and Lisa, please jump in. Someone who shared opening remarks, his name is Cornelius Minor, and he's great. I recommend you Google him, and he works closely with TC and in the area of literacy, but also beyond that, digital literacy. He talked about this idea that being nice is not good enough, but the idea of kindness, especially as it relates to empathy, is a really appropriate starting point for this work. And I think that that's something that we need to kind of keep as an anchor, where I don't want us to ever poo-poo it's kindness, but we want to, but that's important. And if our kids can work from, and we as adults can work from a place where we are being kind in our thoughts and in our reactions, and maybe even kinder than necessary, that's a really powerful place to start. And so I think that's something that's going to also be very much has to be part of this learning and part of this development as well, as it relates to diversity, but also as it relates to special education and as it relates to learning and instruction. So.
Okay, any comments?
So, yeah, I wanted to get the groups.
Yeah, I just wanted, I guess I had a couple questions and a comment. If we're going to call these district goals, does that mean that there are also going to be board goals and superintendent goals, or are we just having sort of one set of goals? Because I know that superintendent goals generally have, are part of what Tony gets evaluated on by us, and in some of the professional development that I've done through NISBA, when we talked about like district setting a vision versus goal, there's kind of a hierarchy of concepts, and you get down to the ones that are much more operational, and these. They're very large and open-ended, and therefore a little bit hard to measure from beginning of year to end of the year. To sort of any metrics as to what they feel to me a little bit more like sort of the vision of where we want to take the district rather than more
this is, and
operational.
And this is how you guys have actually been doing it for the past 4 or 5 years. So what happens from this stage is there's a specific set of actions underneath each one of these. They're essentially action plans. So, and they were actually, each one, though they were similar, they were differently named over the past several years. Like some years they were called superintendent goals, and I think one year they were called district goals. But they all started with a big idea like this, with a sentence or two that was almost vision level. And then there was a page or two.
From the strategic plan.
What's that?
The sentences were typically pulled from the strategic plan.
Okay, so they were pulled from the strategic plan.
So that would be sort of the larger idea.
Okay.
It wasn't something that we sat around every year and redecided what the larger goals were. I mean, I think any one of these could last for quite a while.
Yeah.
Right.
Forever.
Many whiles.
Yeah. Because you just keep working on all of these things. So in that sense, so the superintendent goals were really what we tried to develop in the last few years, because we wanted to actually come up with a rubric, like this is what we really think the district should be working on.
But they were all smaller action goals underneath the bigger statements.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is the next step.
Right. So that's what I
So
wanted
that's
to
the
just
next step.
clarify.
So what we wanted to do was get the board to align on, we don't have a new strategic plan right now.
Right.
We're not going to
And our
have a
term
new
is
strategic
expired.
plan
We have no strategic
for the
plan
next
now.
year,
Right.
18 months or so. And at the same time, I think we've gotten a lot of good feedback from the community over the last couple of years about things that are important to the community. And so that's what the conversations have been about in coming up with these larger statements. And then the next step, if the board is comfortable with these, is crafting that next level of what are the action plans underneath it.
And I guess to me, it's even a little bit more, the one that feels the least like something that you could actually, turn to Tony and say, okay, Tony, go off and do this, is actually the curriculum one, because to me it's talking about maintaining high standards, which sounds like it's something that if we already have it, what are we asking him to do?
So if I and again, I'm not like speaking for you as a board, I'm just letting you know how I saw, so on August 15th, you all received from me priorities that I established. One of them being develop an entry plan, which is going on, community engagement, the special education audit, and broadly instruction and learning, but specifically looking at SEL, specifically looking at Hillside, and getting from our leadership team, where they want to focus. So while that one is quite broad in the way that it's stated now, I think we will be able to flesh out a very specific sort of target for this year. In fact, I could tell you, if I were to be put on the spot right now and say, okay, so what are we doing? We are looking at, in each building, some separate things, but we are collectively looking at this notion of professional development around race and racism, and I see that very much connected to curriculum and instruction, because it's going to have impacts on that work. It's going to impact that work. But looking specifically at each building, we know Hillside is doing work around literacy.
very, very targeted around developing a balanced literacy approach to instruction. They are also doing some second step stuff, but that's really a program that they're implementing. There's not so much PD around that. The middle school is beginning their work with the ruler program, and so they're injecting concepts that they are being exposed to with Mark Brackett into their SEL program, while also launching new courses, which Lisa mentioned a little bit ago, these courageous conversation courses, which link back to our work around race and racism. And then when we get to the high school is looking at things a little more broadly around also SEL, but around student stress levels, which is what brought us to this resiliency conversation that was happening today. Well, that started before today, but continued today. So there are really specific things happening that I see, the things that I just shared with you, dovetail with these goals, but would also be very much a part of my priorities for the year, focusing on those things and supporting those things.
So is the curriculum piece, since we're saying we want to maintain the high academic standards while using whole child lens, and then the second sentence is talking about making sure that we're fostering the social, emotional, and physical development. So is the goal that in addition to academics, we want to make sure we're doing the social and emotional, or is there an actual academic curricular goal like we want, like the literacy stuff at Hillside?
So at Hillside there is academic work happening at the middle school and high school too.
Well, no, I know there's academic work. I'm just talking about in terms of
specifically there. You're saying
in
it's
the
part
goal.
of the goal.
Like is the goal that I don't know, that is the high school level. Or just thinking, Jody, about some of the things you and I have talked about in past years, like either play at the elementary level or fostering, in the high school, like sort of getting kids interested in the sciences, going through the whole gambit from, all the way through to physics, or, are there sort of more, or are we saying that that's not our goal for this year and that our goal is more the integration of the social and emotional?
Let me add one aspect to that, and I sent you all a paper last Tuesday written by Dr. Michael Hines, who's a superintendent in Long Island, and it's a really, and again, my full disclosure, I had some level of collaboration with him, but what it showed is that when you look at 4 factors rather than just academics, when you add to that, as what's in here, the physical, the emotional, and the social, in addition to creating a healthier person, test scores go up. So by nurturing each of those, we are at the same time improving.
No, I understand that piece. I guess what I'm asking is the goal specifically to make sure we're doing those things, or are there any specific academic targets
right,
that we're trying
to increase X in science, or
or adding certain types of courses, or like you were talking before, you mentioned in terms of the middle school auditorium, what about adding a dance program? Like is there something like that that's specific curricular, or are we saying that that's not our focus for the year? I'm not saying it should be. I'm just trying to understand sort of. When I read this, it's almost so
we need
general.
To almost see the next part.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's like I think we're going to kind of spin wheels here right now. I mean, let's take some more comments, but I think that so we don't have a strategic plan. It's Tony's first year in the district. I think what we thought was really important was that we had a categorical framework that we just discussed briefly here, and then the next step was people said, "I'd like to see some more of the meat." Directionally, it kind of feels okay. And then I think if it comes back to your point, Donna, and you kind of say, I'm not seeing a lot of specifics on, the academic achievement side of stuff. That, I think, becomes an interesting conversation to have, and maybe that's rounded out, or...
I guess my issue here is just that those 2 sentences to me aren't explaining something to me. It's just too general. I don't know.
Yeah.
If I could just interject for a second.
Yeah.
I mean, from an educational perspective, the way this is framed, it's sort of like a backwards design kind of approach, where you take this really broad sort of umbrella, whether it's a question or an idea, and this is what you're ultimately trying to attain to. And then underneath it, you have levels, and that's where you get into the more specifics. And to sort of address sort of the academic and social emotional, I mean, I kind of feel like That's what good education is. If you're not doing both of those things at the same time, explicitly, well, then you're not reaching out to your students, you're not creating a classroom environment in which all students can learn, and you're not creating a culture of learning throughout the district.
Yeah,
so they have to occur.
I guess, to me, it's like, it feels like it's saying what's so self-evident that I just am not understanding where it's saying we're trying to get.
Well, I will say, I think we've always assumed that we had a certain something, but even look, we're bringing in social and emotional programs in Hillside and Farragut, which means that
Yeah, I would disagree that it's self-evident, my personal opinion.
I would agree with Doug. It's not self-evident.
I'm going to just share one thing. Like in my mind, in my experience, when I've had, I've done some of these sort of informal, like, focus group conversations. So to preface it by saying, I see this as sort of the vision on some level, right? Okay. That we will drill down to and get into specifics, but I do see, at least in my mind, and we didn't really talk about this, but this is part of the vision of where we need to get. Because in talking to different, like, stakeholders, no one can capture and say, this is who we are. Like, I mean, we are who we are. I'm not saying there's nothing, like, specific and unique about Hastings, but people couldn't verbalize, like, a vision. This is where we're going. So even whether it was academic, whether it was social emotional, whether it was around, it was like, it's like pockets of things, which are all really good things. And so I kind of see the work being figuring out how we connect those dots so that it's sustainable. And even like this emotional resiliency thing that we talked about today, so the district-wide thing, which is great. How do we then link it back to the work that we're going to do with Ruler? How do we link it back to second step? So it's not just this isolated one-night event. We did it. It's great. That it kind of comes back around. So, but that's a bigger thing. That's like a structural thing. That's a process kind of thing. I can't tell you philosophically where we stand as a district, quite honestly. Like, do I want to say that we all believe what you just said about good practices that you do at the SC? Yeah, I do. I don't know if that's what happens in every classroom. Not to say that I would ever be 100% certain that it happens in every classroom, but those are the conversations that we are just starting to have as a team. I can tell you, even just fleshing, like, what do we stand for? Like, what do we believe in? Again, they're big things.
And that makes total sense to me, but I guess then that the terminology, it may just be semantics, but to me that's more of, like you just said, a vision, that, because goals to me sounds more the next level down. That's the practical.
And I think we will have to get there. Yeah.
How do you implement the vision is through, like, you've got this set of goals and then these are the action steps.
Yeah.
And I guess this was just feeling too general to me to sound like a goal. It sounded more like a vision statement.
And I think that is kind of where we started when we talked about it, because the work then becomes, how do we connect it to, like, let's say a committee around curriculum. Whatever work they're doing this year should end up supporting this and actually should help drill down on what it is, maybe more specifically, that you're kind of envisioning that should be there in that goal box, right? And so I don't know that we have that quite yet. And part of that is because I am new, and not me. I know you're not putting it, but, like, even in our discussions as a team, we're still kind of figuring out. So what does this look like? So this is what happens at the middle school. Oh, this is what happens at the high school. Even just having, like, vertical conversations as a team. I mean, I could tell you. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just had a meeting with the building principals last week, and we talked about, like, sharing some stuff. And the response was, oh, this is great. We've never done this before, all together, to just talk about instruction. And I was like, oh, okay. To me, that was just, like, common, I mean, like what you would just expect.
Yeah, like, it's supposed to happen, and everybody thinks it happens.
Right.
But it doesn't always happen. So, like, by laying it out in this way, I think it's something that you continually go back to, and it's like a self-check. Are we doing that? Are we doing that? Are we doing that?
And I almost see this as ongoing. And next year, I'm not saying that it would maybe be the exact same language, but we're going to drill down in a little bit of a different direction around curriculum and instruction, drill down a little bit differently around diversity. But I still see, those things are huge.
Yeah.
And
well, that's why to me they don't sound like
I hear you.
practical goals. They sound like vision statements. I mean, like, maybe one of your goals around curriculum instruction would be to, reintegrate the director of curriculum instruction position back in.
Yes.
Yes, right? But that to me, like, is a goal that if you say you were going to do that this year, and then at the end of the year, you can see if you hired somebody and you had someone in the job. This is not something that you can, and that's why this to me feels more like a vision than a goal.
Fair enough.
I will add, just by the so far as
Please, I just want to also
superintendent.
make sure that other people, there's two people wanted to talk.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
The only thing, thanks, Doug. The only thing I would want to add in this, and possibly should have sent an email around on it earlier, but I agree that it is, as you stated, it's a bit vision statement-y as well as goals, which is fine. We'll flesh it out below. By just reading through maintain high academic standards over and over in my head is it's very, like a B plus is high.
And B plus is?
A B plus is high. Like, if it's a goal, this is personal, and we don't necessarily have to apply this, but and maybe it is also a degree of semantics, but some kind of language such as promote the highest academic standards while which doesn't mean that every single student meets the highest, but our objective was I would hate ever if this really, like, if the goals became, let's just imagine that the goals were the first 4 things you saw on the district website. And every teacher at the end of the day can look and go like, yeah, it was pretty high.
Yeah.
The work I did was pretty high. I know I'd leave by the office sometimes like, yeah, I did decent work today.
Yeah.
But as a goal, I would love it to be, and to talk about it. Is that hyperbolic to say something as
I actually like your words.
I think your words are fine. They're lovely, and we can add, I don't have an issue with it. I actually would say to you, my goal would be to drill down even deeper than that, and to have teachers reflecting on the notion of taking kids from their readiness level and helping them grow as a thinker, as a learner, as an author, whatever the case may be, and looking at that. And to me, what you shared, in addition to this notion of high academic standards, that's pretty broad, which is great.
Yeah.
That should be our goal, right? However we phrase it. Yeah. But when we get a little bit deeper, it's really that we're taking kids from where they are.
I totally agree with that.
And that is not something you can paint with a broad stroke, which most places do. Because if you look at the district, if you go to, I would guess 75% of district websites, you're going to see some variation of the statement you just made.
Yeah.
It means nothing.
Means totally
right. So how do we conceptualize that?
I guess here's the thing. Yeah. Even if it means nothing, because 75% of the districts make it, as a starting point, because we're fleshing out in much greater detail, as you just went through below it, I want the starting point to be high.
I don't disagree with you.
It's a very lukewarm start.
And to me, that's critical to start at a high point.
Yeah.
But recognize that high point is going to be different literally for every learner. Not high like, well, this kid's being minus is good.
No,
I don't mean like that.
No, it's what every kid is capable of.
Right.
Some kids are going to be great in music. Some kids are going to be great,
and our work is to make sure that we provide them a learning, in my
100%.
mind, and again, I'm just throwing out there as your superintendent, in my mind, our work is to then provide our kids
100%.
that experience, whether they're the musician, whether they're the scientist, whether they're the author, and
literally it's the high, ultimately in the drill down, it's the highest that each individual can attain in their areas of expertise and interest. But I want it
I think the problem might be with the word standards. And I think because standards are not what we put on here, it's what the state gives us.
Right.
We right now have to deal with the next generation,
right.
really still coming forward, the next generation learning standards. So we don't get a choice in saying what standards our children have to achieve. I think what I'm hearing from you, though, is that we want our children to achieve their potentials or to grow their potentials. I think the problem may be with the word standards.
I guess, and I agree with you on the word standards may want to be jettisoned because we teach to the, we do testing out of necessity, but we don't aspire as a district to teach to the test. But I do think that all of us sitting in this room have an idea of what it means to be an academic environment, and we want to maintain. I speak for I speak for all of us. We want to maintain the highest possible academic environment.
Environment
for our students.
infused with opportunities for critical thinking and all these to take our minds.
An academic environment, just you know it when you see it. You know it when you're in the classroom, when you say, this is an academic classroom. You know it, when you're around kids that are having a conversation outside of school, and the conversation is, and that's what we want. We want to maintain, it is a school, the social, emotional component is incredibly important, but we also need to maintain the highest possible academic environment. So,
and I just want to say two things. One is just to be mindful of the word potential, because I feel like that's a little bit like it's a judgment on an adult's part to say what a kid's potential is. That's not how you use it. I'm just saying. I remember going through some of that work as a teacher, and then even as a building leader. So what does that mean? Johnny hasn't met his potential. That's your, sort of.
My dad tells me I have my potential all the time.
So does mine, and that's great. And it's a way to motivate from my dad's perspective. But so that's one thing. The other,
tapping into passion.
It is. Well, it's right. It's developing the individual with a skill set that they can then pursue. Because I was going to say initially, we want to make sure our kids can go to college and do their thing. But not every kid, like I actually sat with a group of seniors, and two of them were like, could you help me develop an argument for why I need a gap year? Because I want to share that with my parents. I don't want to go to college next year. It was a really, it
was my son.
It was not your son. It was not your son. But if it was, I would have helped him too. But the point being that
that's exec session content.
They were, they had very, very much thought about this.
Yeah.
Critically, and had really, they actually didn't need me to present. I was kind of listening to their argument, but it goes back to, I talked about it, and it sounds a little kitschy, but it's not, this notion of life ready.
Yeah.
And so the skills that we want our kids to develop are like critical thinking, are the ability to communicate, the ability to collaborate, being mindful of the introverts who maybe need a time alone before they're collaborating, all those things, right? Looking to create and whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
And so I do think there are ways to do that. And what I wanted to say, the luxury that we have in a community like ours is we do have engaged families. Yeah. We do have families who value the educational experience that their kids are going to have and support that. And so I think that gives us the space to play around with this thing.
Yeah.
It's not just like an achievement gap we're trying to fix. Like, this is bigger than that. And I think it's a really powerful opportunity, which most boards don't necessarily go down the path. Most will sort of paint with those broad strokes. So I'm excited. It's gigantic. I don't know what it's going to look like, and I don't know how much we're going to actually accomplish this year, but I can tell you for sure that people are feeling heard, and people are feeling like their perspective is valued, and that they're part of something that they're forming collectively.
I just, sorry, I just want to keep going, but then this does not need to be decided now, but I'll put this out there. We can think about it individually, decide collectively, whether finance should still be a goal. One of our 3 requirements is to set a budget. Yeah. And I talked to Maureen, and just this idea of having some idea around what the year-on-year budget change is going to look like, preparedness for facilities, et cetera. And it is separate and distinct from the curriculum and learning, and then the subcomponents of diversity and special education, which I do agree fall under there. But
So we did talk, and that's something that the board should agree upon. I know Doug and I had a conversation sort of offline, just almost saying that's one of your primary responsibilities as a board to do that. So does it, do we need to set it as a goal if that's the expectation? It's almost like...
It's your job.
I'm not saying that we should.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
And so we talked, that was a or did I have that in my head, the conversation?
No,
we talked about
that was a conversation we had.
But, it's like saying that, I'm going to lead the instruction, I don't know, whatever my job title is, that's kind of one of your 3 major things, like you pointed out. But that being said, I also, and I think we talked about this too, was there may be a year where
it may not be this year, but next year, the budget does become...
Or a bond thing,
A bond,
or something where it really is a significant part of the year.
and a different kind of focal point. But not to say that that's not...
But you're right, it's not, I think you could argue that there's a lot of things that we have to do, and we have to be thoughtful and do them well, that wouldn't fall under a broad vision level set of board goals, but that we have to nail. And, you could argue that to deliver on the curriculum learning stuff we need to do, we've got to have a smart budget, top-notch facilities, all those sorts of stuff. So that was the, I think, the classic pick 3 to 5, things that will galvanize people, things that will drive a dialogue and a conversation. And so that's
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. Also in the interest of, I'm speaking for me, others may feel otherwise, but I'm okay with that. That makes sense.
So for me, I think we still need to tease apart, and I don't necessarily mean right now, the difference between board goals and district goals, as well as superintendent goals. Because even when you talk about things that we need to do, I don't think they're things that we as the board need to do. I think they're things that need to be done in the district, that are part of district goals. The board sort of maybe oversees it, but I think there's that funny area where we're not doing stuff. We're not hands-on or micromanaging or,
I agree, and that's very important to be mindful of, right? We have different roles, but the board, I think, does have to support these goals, this notion of diversity. I can tell you that there are many boards that don't want to touch. We're good. We're all happy. We love each other, and we're good to go. In fact, when I was at a superintendent's meeting the other day, not one person was doing work around this. Not
one person was doing
work around diversity. They were doing SEL, which is great, but it was not around, specifically around diversity. I shouldn't say that. Very specific around like race and racism and that kind of thing. And so I do think that I saw this as an opportunity to say, hey, these are the priorities I've established that I've shared with you, and I will share like sub bullets with all of you about what I see as the targets specifically. But I kind of will rely on the 7 of you to say, you're comfortable with this, right? Like, I'm telling you that I want our focal point for PD this year to be around racism. If you're not comfortable with it, I don't know what's going to happen if you're not comfortable with it. I guess that's a different conversation. But the board, I guess, would need to be on board with that. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to accomplish that work.
And the goal supports them.
That's how I envisioned it. So I hear what you're saying, and I think it's like uncharted territory in some way, which is great. And it does make assumptions, to Tim's point, that we're doing those other things that we're not establishing as goals, we're doing because we see those as the budget, the governance, that kind of thing. And so, I don't know.
But Jody, I feel like there was more to your comment. What's underneath it? There's something else.
No.
I mean, the idea of board goals, for example, that doesn't get at.
I don't know if I can articulate it. I mean, I understand what Tony's saying, and I totally agree that if that's going to be a really important avenue that the school's going to go down this year, and somewhat, it's not totally new, but it's certainly expanded, that it's important to have the board backing that. To me, part of the board goals this year have to do with having a I don't know what the adjective would be, a something transition, and not a smooth transition, but
I think there is an opportunity to have, and Eileen, you and I spoke about this, board goals that are separate than these goals, which are essentially, one of which may be, how's the board operating together? How are we thinking about, transition if some members are, not going to run in the spring, and there's a set of goals which say, how are we functioning as a group? That would be very different than a set of district goals.
See, I wasn't thinking about the board transition, actually. I was thinking about transition of a new superintendent into the district. And to me, that is the most important thing that's going to happen this year, is that we have a new superintendent that will hopefully transition in a way that will be really effective and really productive, and that we are here to kind of do everything that we can to support that. It doesn't mean we can't have discourse or
Right.
agree and disagree, but
Right.
what we really want as a board is for the district to move forward with Tony with the superintendent, and that a lot of the goals for the district sort of come from his vision, his ideas, that we then are here to
So
support.
if there's a different set, which I could agree, there's a different set of board goals, support Tony in his transition, have, something around our function. I mean, we're doing some of that work already with Robert Hendricks, and there may be a set of 3 or 4 things, and Eileen, you mentioned that you've had them in years past. They might not have been disseminated as a document, but they've been there. Let's get them down. And is there anyone who wants to take a shot at crafting some of those goals, that other set?
This process is a little different than what we've done in the past, because in the past it was always just a board conversation altogether, rather than like, here are 4, what do you think of these 4 kind of thing put out.
Wait, but you just said that they came out of the strategic plan, though.
I never saw any goals before. Like last year, I never saw any goals. I assumed we didn't do them last year because I never saw them.
What, the board goals?
I never saw any
We never really
goals.
talked about the board goals because we were hiring
Right, I
somebody
never
new.
saw superintendent
But Eileen,
goals or
the district,
Yeah,
but
but
let's
the
be honest,
superintendent
hold on a second, wait a second, whoa, I'm just going to stick a pin in this, and let's, last year, we never saw goals.
Right.
Okay, so let's be clear that, I don't know what the process was, but the process was, there were goals drafted somewhere with a big DRAFT across the top of them, and I saw them April time zone. Okay? So, I've never been a part of a goal-setting process, so I think we have to be...
No, time out.
Okay.
We're still now talking about 2 different things.
Okay.
The superintendent's goals.
That's what you saw, the draft of the superintendent's goals.
I saw no goals.
And I got no goals.
I saw no goals, so
Last
all
Right,
I'm
because
saying...
the goals were gone. I mean, he was leaving as of November, so his goals were
But
gone.
aren't they supposed to be set like within
Right,
like
that's
2
why
months
we're
of
trying
the
to
renewal
start
of
this
his-
process
his
a
year,
little
his
bit
year
early.
5, like in the summer? That was my understanding.
Yes.
So,
They were
so
ready to
okay,
talk
so
about
let's
it in
start, so
August.
go, okay,
They
so...
were ready to talk about it in August, but then we had to have a new board member come on.
Right.
So then the question is, do you talk about them when the new board member comes on? And by the time we had our new board member come on, we were now down to superintendent. So let's just be
Okay,
clear about that.
so back to the idea of...
We were
So back to the idea of board goals.
As
Back
just
to the
2
idea
new
of-
board members last year, we
There were
never
not-
saw them.
There were not
knew about the
board goals
process.
that were, I don't think there were board goals.
There were
last
no
year.
board goals
There were
last
no
year.
board goals last year. Because basically it was kind of like crisis after crisis.
Well, no, but I asked you for the board goals over the last 4 or 5 years, and you said you didn't have...
No, well, like the board goals were last, like for example, one of them was to get ourselves into a regular cycle about, and to define the measures that we use to evaluate the superintendent. Because I can tell you, when, 2 superintendents ago, it was a very vague process, there was no rubric.
And that was that NISBA form.
Right, so then we brought in the NISBA form, we used it different ways over a couple of different years, we asked for specific outcomes, so we developed this process of this is what we have, and this is, we need to get it by May. His evaluation, we would each write back about, what was going on in terms of our...
So it would have been May
analysis, whether we'd
2017
accomplished
for
those
this
dates.
coming year.
Right, well, in May.
It would have been May for
Before
this
the end of-
past year,
for
but
the
we didn't
past
do
year.
it because Roy was
You're
gone.
talking about the check-in, not the setting.
Correct.
Get
Second was in
back a
August.
personal
So everyone was supposed
assessment
to
of
be
how
full-
effectively he's delivered on those goals.
Yeah, so the setting should be done by September, and the evaluation should be done in April, May, to see, and you have a check-in during the course of the year.
And I will just say, we have a different process now as per Tony's contract. What we signed with Tony says that we're going to set, these will not be Tony's evaluation goals. We will set an agreed-upon set of goals that the board and Tony grant. And I think your contract requires that we check in with you twice about them. And the one thing we did, modify orally is that his contract says that we were supposed to do them in August, but that didn't make any sense because you're still learning, your way around
Right.
town. So
And-
we delayed it. We
and
still have delayed it a bit.
And I did send out priorities based on the conversations that we had, because I didn't really see that I would be that far off from what you received on August.
You were in compliance with the contract, and we said this is too fast for us.
Right, and we talked about the following up with more specifics, and I told you that I would have something to you by the end of this month, which is at the end of this week.
And we wanted to set the board goals so that your goals,
Right, right.
the district goals, so that
can
It could
support
be
one of
within
those,
a
right.
framework.
So, yeah,
See, and I think that sort of philosophically, in the past, the district, the framework for district goals would come from the analysis of the superintendent based on his knowledge of things that were being worked on, like conversations that he would have with the administrator. So what are you doing, where do you think you need to go in your building? To what resources do you need? So that it was not defined at the board level. And I do look at these and I think that these are very like vision goals. And frankly, if we're going to talk about vision, it can't just be the board that talks about vision. We have to.
I'm sorry, you can't?
You can't just have the board talk about our vision. I think you really need to bring this back to the community. But that's what I'll think of.
I really think it's important. I really think it's important to look at this as like the last year, because we did go to the community. We have a 52-page detailed document of things that community members in a 515-person survey, in a 72-person community event, which surrounded asking about what you want in a super, but half of all of that surveying and focus group conversations were, what do you want in the district? I don't think we are going to get a categorically different set of things. I think we have the community's voice and buy-in to what's going on here. I did not sit here with Tony and Lisa and go, what would be cool for Hastings? You know,
I'm not suggesting that you
so,
did,
but I guess what I'm saying is, I think we're in a great place to set a set of vision level goals based on a heck of a lot of input that we have received in a variety of forums to kick off this process.
And I just want to add that we've put the notice out to the community that we're going to be discussing this. This was on the last agenda with the goals attached. Remember, we ended early, and I specifically asked a pretty full room, is anybody here to talk about goals? So it's already been broadcast. I said, okay, we will talk about them at the next. So there has been the opportunity 2 times for discussion on this with the community.
Well, okay. I still think that that is a broader conversation that should go on. I'm not saying we don't have good information. I think that of these 4, it's the first one that I have that's the most nebulous, and I'm not sure what that actually translates to in terms of goals. But so here's the question. Do we want to wait and see what Tony's priorities are based on his input and going on from this year? And then we do have to come up with some way to evaluate them. And that has to come up. That's one step of this. And they will fit under these umbrellas that, came out of the surveys and conversations that people have had. But what is the... I think we still need to have that conversation about what are our actions this year in terms of, are we going to try to accomplish something outside of the things that Tony's going to be doing in the school? And those, to me, are board goals. So I think there are sort of 3 different things, and we can do this differently than we have in the past. But
well, so I think for the first 2, I mean, the third one, well, let's have a conversation about it. But for the first 2, I think
when you say first 2, which 2 are the
district and super goals. And I'm not even sure what they all are right now, but I'll just use more words that are less. This vision level goals and a set of tactical goal plans, okay? I think that's the process we're trying to get through right now. We're trying to get some alignment on these, which already is baked in input from the community, with this board, so that because we don't have a strategic plan, and we haven't had a strategic planning process, so that Tony can build out plans underneath it that become then the metrics with which we can measure his progress and performance over a year. And I think we can look at those detailed sets of action plans and say, not detailed enough, or we think this, or we think that. And I'm assuming that those are the conversations that were had in those NISBA documents in years past, that those were pulled from the strategic plan, 4 or 5 high-level goals. There was a plan put underneath them, and that someone looked at that plan. Someone on this board, along with Roy, looked at those plans.
we all did.
Right. And that's what I'm envisioning we're doing right now. It's the same thing. And, okay, so So let's stop that, and where is that assumption not accurate, if that's what I'm feeling? Because there's still it's like a vibe in this room, which is like, still like off, that's not I'm saying that and I'm hearing nods, but like I'm not feeling the energy that there's alignment with that. Like Jody, like that deep breath right there would say to me, I'm checked out and not cool, not engaged, uninterested.
Christina, you had a different response.
No, like I think this, I'm sorry, I think this is great. I think this is awesome. I think this is like what education should aspire to be. You set these, I don't know whether it was you or it might have been Rob. Somebody had said, you're shooting for the moon and you aim for the stars in the hopes to get to the moon or whatever. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're setting these really huge ideas, whether it's vision or goals or whatever it is that you want to use, and slowly but surely you're just trying to chip away at it. And maybe one of those little chips is sort of like the tactical thing that you're talking about, and maybe one of those tactical things is part of Tony's goal this year. So it's like a subdivision of this. And then this becomes sort of like a guide for us as a board, a guide for Tony, a guide for the district at large. And then if everybody is working towards these same goals and everybody's working towards trying to reach these same visions, everybody's on the same page. And that's when, like, you're really working on all cylinders. And that's when everybody is working together. I mean, I don't know. And I get it. Like, I totally understand if, like, hey, tweak a little bit of the first one and the verbiage and whatnot. I get that. But I think in general, I think it's great.
Yeah, I'm okay with these four. I think these four are solid. I think it's a question of whether or not, let me put it this way. I understand where you're coming from on keeping finance to the side. I do think as a board goal, being a bit more forward-looking and forecasting on our finance side will ultimately be a goal. But as district goals, these four, I'm quite okay with it. I do want to change the language on the first one, if it's drop standards, which I think is appropriate, to something where we speak more broadly about the educational environment that we are striving to create. And then, yes, filling in a whole lot of Tony-specific detail underneath it. But as a point of moving forward, I am very much good with these four.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very hard to argue against any of these. I mean, I think they're all, like, hugely important places to go. My concern is we spend a lot of time talking about just this, and I don't know how we're going to get anywhere on these things. So I guess I'm just a little more anxious to hear how we're going to get there.
Okay, I mean, I think that's fine. I think that's our next step.
I don't disagree, and I think just one thing that is important to, and maybe this is where you were going before, Jody, I'm not 100% sure, but the sort of daily operations and how this will actually play out in our schools is my responsibility, is my work, is not your work as a board. And so what the ruler program looks like in the middle school is something I need, well, not even just me, I'm working with Gail and Chris. And so we have to make sure that there's clarity around that as it relates to roles and responsibilities. And so that I think is important. I don't mean to speak for you, but that's kind of where I got the question exactly right. was going. I also want to be mindful of the fact that again, looking at the ruler program as an example, the effectiveness of the ruler program, while I would be a part of that, I'm also going to be relying on my middle school leadership team to effectively implement that and support that. And so that's a part of the process that's in the back of my mind, because I don't really have relationships with these people yet. I don't really know what their patterns and behaviors are. I don't know what their approach is to that type of work. And so that's also something that I am, so not only are we doing the work, but I'm trying to figure out who the players are and what their approach is to that work and what their mindset is and all that stuff. And so as we're talking about this, I'm starting to think about that piece. And so I do think that there's value in establishing some board goals that are very specific to some of the work that is in your zone, in your lane, and it might be different than these district vision statements, and maybe that's what they. I'm not quite sure, and we can flesh that out. And then there are also my priorities that I'm working on, and being mindful of whatever you're going to assess me on is based on my action, like my ability to do that, like my ability to communicate, if that's one of them. Our work around the special education audit, again, not that I'm doing that in isolation, I'm working very closely with Laura and Tesfa and beyond.
But you're the leader.
Right. No, but I'm saying that is all very much interconnected,
right.
And so that's something that I'm thinking about as well. So just to.
I am just going to point us to the clock, and just, I don't want to cut off important conversation. If anybody has anything else to say.
Sorry, just one additional thing. I really like the wording on the second, third, and fourth. I have no issues with those. I do like
we'll tweak it. We'll just tweak it a little bit.
Some tweaking with that. Also, to me, there's to me a very central phrase in at least what's important to me in class, which is the child-centered approach. And I would love to somehow, a whole child is, I think, referring to when I'm reading this, whole child is basically saying that we're not just looking at academics, but we're looking at the social, emotional, and physical development. Child-centered to me is a different thing that to me is a critical aspect of my vision of what a classroom and what education should look like.
So I can tell you that, philosophically, I very much believe that in a child-centered environment. Practically, what does that look like? It looks like, to what I was trying to explain to you, like we find our kids at their readiness levels, and that's where we take them. So it's not, okay, there's 10 of us sitting in this room, we're all doing the same thing. We may have exposure to the same thing, but in different ways. And so that's the kind of thing. I don't know if that is an anchor for us as a district, that is what we believe, that we're looking at every learner as realistic as it can be. I as a classroom teacher, you can't possibly plan 24 different lessons, but you do need to know your 24 different learners in some way, shape, or form. And so, but that's work that we haven't really started yet, because that's significant to think about.
It is significant.
Child-centered versus the whole, not even versus the whole child, but that's a different kind of thing. But also, what does that look like? Because child-centered also means the adults have to relinquish some of the control. And I don't know where people stand with that here, to be quite honest. I don't even know where our leadership team stands with that concept. So those are big things that I do see as years worth of work. Having been a building principal for 8 years in one place, I know where we started, I know where I left. And I know what's still there because it was sustainable beyond me, because it became a cultural shift, a philosophical shift. And so that work takes time too. So that's why I see these sort of big statements as anchoring our work for the foreseeable future. So
I guess I would just be asking the board whether other people on the board would sort of be comfortable incorporating that notion into that. My screen keeps going black.
Child-centered into the first one?
So
I can't speak
with these four,
I don't know. Child-centered.
What's next steps?
That's where I'm going.
We're wrapping up in minutes, so then let's go to next steps and fill in.
Yeah, so...
Wait, I'm sorry, are we leaving this?
Well, we're going to get to next steps in this. So as a next step, Tony, do you want to take a shot at, you've gotten some of this feedback, at crafting some of that language as
in the first
just
point?
adding some of these, to that first point, adding some of the feedback that we've gotten here, and then start to build. The one thing we spoke about was you were building your action plan underneath each of them. And as the next step, we can review that all together. Okay. And then, but I guess the second step is then, do we as a board want to work on board goals? And I'll just reconnect with, I guess, people offline to talk a little bit about that.
And we can, like I said, I'm speaking with Robert tomorrow. I could also ask him for part of the retreat next week to be that we flesh that out.
I don't think there's that much more work to do.
No, I
actually don't. I think if you connect with people.
And that's why I was going to say, procedurally, do we vote on these, or?
No.
And I think it's funny, it's sort of just off the top of my head, it's kind of like you have board goals, one big one being having an evaluation criteria for Tony.
Right.
Right? And then there's this side of the work that we need to do called facilities and budgeting. And, doing that effectively. And that's 1 and 2. What else are you?
I guess I just want to make sure we separate what's our job versus what's our goal. Like evaluating.
But I guess the thing is this, and this is the thing that kind of kills me on the budget side, is that if we can get a budget done as a group of people, kind of hacking through it and run up against the tax cap, and you can always get it done. Then there's getting it done well and in a sensitive way. And so that to me is the goal, which is I still think the tax cap represents the third rail. I don't want to touch it. I want to be as thoughtful as possible around not. And so that's a goal. That's a goal.
And I could see a goal, instead of whatever about the budget, I would love us to go through the last 5 years of budgeting and get a sense of, where are we too high, where are we low, sit with Maureen. That sort of analysis of our budget, I think, is a great goal for a board. If that's something we all like, but it takes our job and gives it an annual tag to it. I am going to just point out it's 10:10.
Okay, so we'll...
You have an executive session.
Yeah, no, I know. But I was going to ask, we have one more agenda item. Do we need to do that tonight, or can we move to the executive
We can
session?
move to the executive session.
Because I know we have...
You have to do the second public. You don't have to do the public.
We don't, right?
Two is probably the same.
No, but we have one more agenda item about committees, but can we put that on hold?
Well, I guess the question it's just 2 committees left, which is the special ed and the curriculum.
And Laura is working on special ed. She's already met with SEPTA, and she is going to send out a communication to share what she envisions as the structure for the special ed committee. Sort of people can come to talk about things that are of interest almost. It would be broken up throughout the year. As it relates to curriculum committee, it's gigantic. And so I'm trying to figure out if we need to also be running diesel, if we also need to be running technology. And I'm also mindful of the fact I don't want it to be death by committee.
Sorry, it's gigantic in terms of purview?
Yes.
Or gigantic in terms of...
Purview.
I'm going to say, why don't we put that one off to the next board meeting?
Well, I think it also dovetails with what we're talking about goals-wise, so if I can flesh that out a little more for you, then it might... I think it could be specific. Basically, what I'm getting is that we have a lot of committees.
Yeah.
I don't know what the value is of them, based on what I'm hearing, based on what I'm seeing, based on minutes. Not every committee, not the theater arts committee, whatever. That doesn't, not the audit committee, not the facilities committee, but curriculum, diesel, community leaders. All these things were happening, but to no end, with really no clear purpose. And not as a criticism, I think it just became this perfunctory, okay, we did it, we met, that's great. But what's our focal point? And so diesel might actually really be the focal point for the year as an offshoot of curriculum if our focus is diversity. And so it's massive, but I also can't undertake all of it, to be completely open. And I don't want to sit... There's no white space in my calendar. That's all I can tell you. If I could flash my calendar up here, there literally is not one white space. So I don't want to add committee meeting, a significant number of committee, and I'm not whining. I'm just telling you the reality. Otherwise, I'm going to be having committee meetings at 10 p.m. or 6 a.m. Because I don't know where else they would fit. And so I want to be very intentional about which committees run with a purpose.
Okay, so you'll come back to us with that.
My only committee thing is figuring out what to do about policy, because I think right now we just sort of have a timing issue that, Christina can do afternoons, I can only do before work. So, either I can step off the committee and someone else can get on, or Christina can. Or it's maybe we swap. Maybe one...
Well, you don't have to necessarily write. You have to be, if you tackle one policy, could you share it? Maybe, I don't know.
It's difficult with the policy committee to not have the 3 people...
all the time together.
Why don't I suggest that you guys both look at the committees that you're interested in, the potential ones, and then we can look and figure out what makes sense.
One of the reasons I am interested in policy, but one of the reasons I ended up volunteering for that one was because a few meetings ago, we talked about which committees absolutely have to meet during school hours. And
Policy is not one of them.
policy is not one of them. So I said, okay, I'll volunteer for policy. I mean, I am interested in it, but that was one of the reasons I volunteered for it. So like audit committee meets during, then we're talking about the 4 that are mandated by the state.
Right.
You know, facilities meets during the school day. You know, I can't take time contractually off of work.
Could it be that we
But
do-
I think the school day, though, includes the afternoon part that you were saying you could do for, I mean, like, because couldn't facilities?
Oh, I mean,
Facilities could meet
facilities can meet anytime. I mean, I don't know, I mean, I'm like, you know, I don't care. Yeah. I
Well,
always,
as long, except that at a time when Joe's here usually.
Right, but he's going to be here at 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
listen, if he had to make like 5 meetings a
My
year,
school
he'll
day,
come.
contractually.
Right.
Yeah.
Contractually, I have to be there at 8:05. My last class ends at 3:20. If I have my bags packed while my students are still in class, which we all know is not good practice,
Not really.
I'm lucky if I can book it to my car by 3:30. And then I have to come through buses. I mean, it's just Irvington.
So are we
but
talking
there's-
4
It takes
o'clock?
forever.
Yeah, it takes
No,
forever.
that takes like a 25-minute.
I mean, I think
I don't know
it's
that
not
we're going to
3 o'clock.
resolve this here right now. Again, I'm just being mindful of time. Is this better to have in small discussions, like, over the next week? Again, I'm not trying to...
No, I don't know,
I'm just
because I
being
mean, I
mindful.
just don't know if it means shifting who's on what committee, which is easier to, I mean, I
Look,
don't know.
I guess I'd say that, Donna, you have an enormous historical knowledge of policy, which I think is useful. But I also think that Christina's interest in being on it is really important. And if there,
Well, and if this is my last year, I mean, other people should learn what they're doing.
right, but I'm
Yeah.
saying, so maybe to try to come up with a time between the two of you that could work, and then whoever else will be the third person on the committee.
Well, Lisa's the other person on the committee, but I have a
I
9...
don't have to be.
But you're the one with the most flexible schedule. You're not the issue. I have a 9 to 5 job that is in New Jersey. I can, and I can be here at 8 o'clock in the morning. I can't come in here at 6, and I don't think Tony or Janine want to be here at 6 either.
So what if you had a policy meeting on a day of a board meeting, but had it at 6:30?
In the evening.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was
As
thinking.
long as it doesn't conflict with the PTSA.
All right, but then we can switch off. Other people can
Yeah,
cover
that's
for that.
That works.
I think that might be the best.
Oh, yay.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Well done.
Glad I could think about
Thank you,
something.
thank you. Okay,
So then we'll schedule it
About
for
it.
2 weeks from today?
That's October 10th, and there is actually no PTSA meeting that night, so
Oh, perfect.
that would work. Well, that's-
Okay. So with that, are we ready to move on? Okay. So may I have a motion to move into executive session for the purpose of discussing the personnel history of particular persons?
So moved.
And a second, please?
Second.
All in favor? Okay.